The UN condemned the invasion as, quote, a racist, imperialist attack. A second American has died in combat in Iraq. The Marine was part of the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force. He received his wounds during battle with Iraqi forces near the port of Qasr. Another U.S. Marine was killed earlier in a fight at an oil field in southern Iraq. There is a wave of steel barreling toward Baghdad tonight. A 20-mile-long chain of coalition army tanks and vehicles is rumbling northward across the Iraqi desert. That convoy is expected to reach Baghdad within 2 to 4 days. The lead elements of the invasion force are now estimated to be closing in on just about the halfway mark between Kuwait and Baghdad. Coalition forces have also taken 2 airfields in the west, as well as the southern Afar Peninsula, apparently successful in preventing a repeat of 1991, when Iraq caused an environmental disaster by pumping oil into the Persian Gulf. Well, that is the very latest from CNN Center. I'll be back in half an hour. Now, complete coverage of the strike on Iraq continues with Lou Dobbs.
Good evening. It's been an extraordinary day of military successes for the coalition in Iraq. Advances by coalition forces in the south and the north. Iraqi oil fields under the full control of coalition forces tonight. And Iraq today was shocked when the bombing began, just as the Pentagon promised.
كبيرة وهائلة ربما هذا ما أشار له المسؤولون العسكريون.
The shock was literally awesome. Whether that will be sufficient to convince the Iraqi leadership to surrender remains to be seen, of course. But what that leadership does face is at least another 19 hours of bombing, some 1,500 bombs and missiles ready to deliver a very significant message, an unequivocal message, that Saddam Hussein's days in power are ended. Hundreds of Iraqi soldiers have already received the message as they surrendered to coalition forces who continue to take further control of Iraq. And it is a message welcomed by the people of Iraq, who were overjoyed by the arrival of these American Marines, shaking hands with them, tearing down a poster of Saddam Hussein, that taking place in southern Iraq in Safwan. The air assault today on Baghdad was unprecedented in terms of its size, its scope, and its power. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld called the mission a success. He said the Iraqi regime is starting to lose control of their country. We begin our coverage tonight with senior Pentagon correspondent Jamie McIntyre.
The Pentagon calls it A-Day, A for the massive air assault that would drop more than 1,500 precision-guided bombs and missiles on hundreds of separate targets across Iraq. The Pentagon says it's a bombardment of historic proportions.
The weapons that are being used today have a degree of precision that no one ever dreamt of in a prior conflict.
The bombing, designed to shock and awe Iraq's military, centered on Baghdad, but also struck key targets in Mosul and Kirkuk in the north and Basra in the south.
We successfully accomplished our mission. We did everything that we set out to do. Everybody's back safe and sound.
All targets are designed to undermine the regime of Iraqi President Saddam Hussein and to convince his generals to turn on him or at least surrender. For instance, this presidential palace compound was hit, located in downtown Baghdad. While some Iraqi regular troops are giving up, others are fighting. 2 U.S. Marines have been killed in action, and so far there are few signs the Iraqi military is cracking.
It apparently, what we have done thus far has not been sufficiently persuasive that they would have done that.
The U.S. has taken some ground in the south, including Qasr, a key southern port, along with 2 airfields in western Iraq. The southern oil fields have just about been secured, and the U.S. ground forces have moved more than 100 miles into Iraq from Kuwait. But the war is far from won.
Clearly we're moving towards our objectives, but we must not get too comfortable. We're basically on our plan and moving towards Baghdad, but there are still many unknowns out there.
And those unknowns include what will the U.S. encounter when they get to Baghdad, those U.S. forces, and meet up with the Republican Guard? Will the Republican Guard be ready to surrender? Will there be jubilant Iraqis, or will they find the Guard dug in and ready to use chemical or biological weapons? Lou?
Jamie, thank you very much. Jamie McIntyre, our senior Pentagon correspondent. We'll be talking with General Don Shepard, CNN military analyst, about this unprecedented demonstration of bombardment against selected targets in Baghdad later in the broadcast. That coming up here in just a few moments. And we will continue, of course, through live cameras in Baghdad to monitor the situation there minute by minute. Tens of thousands of U.S. and British forces are moving tonight, as you would expect. They're pushing more than 100 miles now into Iraq from the south. Destination Baghdad now only about 200 miles away, roughly 2 to 3 days travel time. Wolf Blitzer is in Kuwait City and has the latest for us. Wolf?
There's no doubt that this is moving a lot more quickly than many anticipated, Lou, the ground invasion in particular, not just in the south as they're moving up from Qasr up to Basra, and they will continue beyond that in the hours that follow. U.S. Army personnel as well as Marines, but they're also moving in the western part of Iraq, securing critical air bases there, areas from which Scud missiles were launched against Israel a dozen years ago, as well as in the northern part of Iraq. So all of the sides of Baghdad effectively being encircled right now, U.S. forces on the ground. But also they're in the air, and the airstrikes that devastated Baghdad earlier today were pounding. The shock and awe campaign, as it's dubbed, the start of this air campaign on A-Day, as they call it. You could have felt, as people, eyewitnesses were telling us, you could feel it throughout that city of some 5 million people, the tremendous thunder, and of course they saw those mushroom clouds as they emerged. Some of the eyewitnesses, including journalists, said that among the buildings that were hit was the foreign ministry complex in Baghdad, and at least one, but possibly two, presidential palaces used by Saddam Hussein. No word, of course, on the Iraqi leader. No one knows right now whether he's alive, whether he's dead, how much control he has over the situation, and the same holds for his two sons, Uday and Qusay. Luke?
Well, thank you very much. Wolf Blitzer will be updating us from Kuwait as events and developments warrant. If I may, I'd like us to go to the full-screen picture of Baghdad tonight. Sirens have just sounded. There has been a few sounds of anti-aircraft fire, and as I said, we will of course continue to watch the night skies over Baghdad very, very close. We now turn to the White House, where our senior White House correspondent John King is this evening. John, what is the latest you have about the state of the Iraqi leadership?
Well, Lou, this escalation and the intensity and the pace of the bombing in Baghdad comes as a senior administration official tells us that the Bush administration has concluded the Iraqi leadership is in, quote, complete confusion and complete disarray. Senior officials say there is no evidence at all that Saddam Hussein or either of his two sons are giving minute-to-minute, hour-to-hour orders and commands to their military planners or to their security forces. Still a question as to whether Saddam Hussein himself is still alive, we are told. Now, Mr. Bush is now up at the Camp David presidential retreat. He left the White House earlier this afternoon after he had a meeting with congressional leaders here at the White House today. His routine military briefings, a war council meeting, the White House now calls it, will be held up at Camp David at the presidential retreat tomorrow. We see here this morning's war council meeting, the full National Security Council, a rare glimpse of the White House Situation Room, a secure facility one level below the Oval Office. Mr. Bush, of course, at the end of the table, getting an update from his full national security team here. We are told that in the planning of this operation, Mr. Bush asked many questions about some of the targets we have seen bombed today, asked about whether bombing those targets would cause civilian casualties. But now that the war is underway, the plan is being executed, Ari Fleischer says the last thing this president will do is micromanage the generals.
The president believes that the best way to carry out a military operation is to very carefully, thoroughly review the plans in advance, to ask the hard questions of the planners as the plan is being developed, to have a team in whom he has confidence, to have a military on the ground that is superbly trained, well equipped, and well paid. The president is satisfied that those criteria have been met. He would not have...
Now, White House officials tell us the intensified bombing campaign came after the administration concluded that a number of efforts to try to generate some form of a surrender had failed. There have been direct contacts, the U.S. military to Iraqi military units. There have been the use of Kurdish officials in the north and other expatriates, Iraqi expatriates, helping the CIA and others. Also, Secretary of State Colin Powell said some contacts with other countries to the Iraqi leadership trying to come up with some sort of an exile deal. The White House saying none of that has proven fruitful, so the bombing intensifies, although, Lou, the White House did leave the door open today, still saying even at this moment, even as the campaign intensifies, the White House has not flatly closed the door on the idea of Saddam Hussein going into exile if he were to emerge with some sort of a deal to go to another country. Ari Fleischer saying the president wants to end this as peacefully as possibly with as little losses of life as possible. Lou?
John reports tonight that the Iraqi 51st Division, which is located, as you well know, in the south of the country in Basra, has surrendered their commander and deputy commander. Any reaction, any thoughts from the White House there this evening?
Nothing on that particular development, and every time we ask such questions, we are told that that is what the White House wants and what the White House hopes and what the White House expects in some cases, but operational details, quite a lot of discipline here at this White House. Lou, when you ask about military matters, they have a simple answer: call the Pentagon.
We will continue to try, of course. John, thanks very much. John King from the White House. Well, I've been told that air raid sirens sounding over Baghdad at this hour have resumed. Joining us now from the scene of today's shock and awe bombing campaign is journalist Mei Ying Welch.
Hi, yeah, the air raid sirens just went off here, and we're just kind of waiting for the bombs to start falling and the anti-aircraft fire to start going into the sky.
Mei Ying, are there sounds of aircraft or anti-aircraft fire at this point?
No, right now where I am, there isn't anything. Just only a few minutes ago, there was a family that just emerged from a shelter nearby here, and they were trying to go home. They live in an apartment building right here next to where I am, which is very, very close to the Ministry of Information, perhaps a target in this war. And they were tired. They didn't think there would be any more bombing, and they wanted to go home because they said there was no food at the shelter, no bathroom, and they want to go home and feel comfortable, and they just didn't believe it was going to continue. They had their dog with them, and I spoke to them. I told them, look, it might keep going, and then they had an argument among themselves, and the grandmother kind of won out. She forced them all back into the shelter. Yeah.
Mei Ying, you have gone through the first two waves of bombing today. Describe that for us, if you will.
The first 2 days of the bombing were relatively light. I mean, from the perspective on the ground here, they were, not that bad, really. I mean, the bombing seemed to be very far away. The thing that really seemed close was the anti-aircraft fire. You could hear that very loudly. It almost felt like it was going off right by your ear.
Describe today's bombing, if you would.
Today's bombing was completely different. Today's bombing there's no comparison between what we experienced in the last 2 nights and what we experienced tonight. Tonight was awesome and shocking. It was, very in your face. I was standing on a roof over here by the Tigris River, and one of the major buildings associated with the government exploded right in front of my face, and it just sent this tremendous shockwave that rocked our building, and it was a very incredible sight to see smoke and fire rising very high into the sky and continuing explosions as we ran down the stairs to get away from it.
Mei Ying, thank you very much. Mei Ying Welch in Baghdad tonight. Mei Ying, we will come back to you as the evening continues. Are the air raid sirens, have they blown all clear yet?
No, we had an all clear, and then only perhaps about 9 or 10 minutes later we received this new air raid siren.
Mei-Ying, thank you very much, and we'll be returning to you, as I say, through the evening. Mei-Ying Welsh in Baghdad. Coalition forces today captured 2 key airfields in western Iraq. U.S. intelligence officials consider one of those fields a potential site of Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. Rula Amin is at the Jordanian-Iraqi border and has the story for us. Rula?
Lou, those U.S. and British forces are just about 75 kilometers east to where I'm standing right here. I'm standing at the Jordanian-Iraqi border. The lit arches you see behind me is the entrance to that border, and the U.S. troops have taken over those 2 very strategic airfields. It's a very significant development because these strategic airfields are a multiple of airstrips. One of these runways runs as long as 8,000 feet, which makes it available and that large planes can land there, supply aircraft, military aircraft, and that means that the U.S. can bring in new troops into western Iraq without having to go through countries like Jordan and Saudi Arabia. Now the border here behind me is still being manned by Iraqi soldiers. We don't know until when this will stay, this situation will continue. But however, the fact that the U.S. are only this far away means that they can come to the highway between Baghdad and Amman at any minute and cut those troops, cut off the soldiers from the main headquarters in Baghdad. Lou?
Well, thank you very much. And if we could show that map again that Rula was referring to, the 2 airstrips in western Iraq, they are designated there on the map, as you see, as H3, that the base closest to the Jordanian border, H2, more easterly and northerly from that base. Those both now obviously under control. Rula, I mean, thank you very much. Kyra Phillips, along with photographer Brian Pearson, are aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln. Aircraft from that carrier, among those sending off aircraft to drop bombs over Iraq today. Kyra joins us now via videophone. Kyra?
Well, Lou, Joint Chiefs of Staff General Richard Myers said yesterday that the U.S. was approaching large-scale operations. Well, welcome to shock and awe from the USS Abraham Lincoln. Let's take a look at some pictures that we shot just as strike fighters were getting ready to take off on this mission over Baghdad. I can tell you that this is what strike fighter pilots here have been training for: massive airstrikes, fast and furious. After Tomahawk missiles were launched, strike fighters engaged their targets, military sites, air defense systems, government buildings, Iraqi leadership compounds, and air bases. There were also restricted strike areas, mosques, schools, water and electricity, chemical storage areas, and I've been told that Saddam Hussein is hiding weapons in these areas. They will be taken care of by other means. Now, pilots say they were fired upon consistently, Lou. When I talked to them afterwards, threats they came upon: old Soviet MiG-25, surface-to-air missiles, and lots of AAA fire. Now, some other elements that we have to show you in the strike brief that we were able to observe, lots of talk about preventing collateral damage. This took place in a number of ways, one of which precision weapons. Between the F-18 and F-14 jets, weapons included JDAM, GPS-guided bombs, LGB, laser-guided bombs, also Sidewinder heat-seeking missiles, Sparrow, Phoenix, AMRAAM radar-guided missiles. Now, the squadron that led the strike package off the USS Abraham Lincoln tonight, the F-14 package, BF-31, F-14 Tomcatters. Before the strikes, Squadron Commander Paul Haas stressed to his men situational awareness.
A lot of lights, a lot of explosions. Don't get mesmerized by that. Focus on what you need to do. We're all, each and every one of us, extremely good at what it is that we do. What we do, train very, very well all our careers, whether that's 18 years or 6 for this. As you're going to do great up there. Don't get blinded by the lights.
Then once the strikes over Baghdad did begin, as you can see and as you can imagine, other members of this squadron remained pinned to their seats in the ready room, watching the air campaign as it went down live on CNN. As they observed the airstrikes, Lou, they were not surprised, they told me. They said, so far, shock and awe is underway as planned. 2 of those pilots that were a part of the first massive air campaign over Baghdad. With me now, Lieutenant Steve Uries, Also, Lieutenant Lucas Kadar. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for coming.
Steve, let's start with you. You're the one that ended up leading the F-14s in this massive airstrike. Tell me how it felt. Tell me what was going through your mind once you got over Baghdad.
Well, on the way in, I said, please don't let me screw this up. I didn't expect to be leading this. Unfortunately, the person who was going to be leading had a mechanical problem and didn't launch, so I filled that role. It was an amazing experience for me. I've been here for the second time I've been back here in this region doing Operation Southern Watch, and that can be a frustrating endeavor. It's nice to finally be back and doing something that's going to bring closure to this regime, and hopefully not have anybody have to come back and do Operation Southern Watch ever again.
Lucas, how did it feel for you? This was your first war.
Yeah, it was great. Just like we trained for. Everything went real smooth, like clockwork tonight. Everything from the launch to the pre-mission tanking, execution in the target area, and back out again. Coming back for the pass on the ship, which is always the scariest part, or the highest adrenaline rush of it all. But it was great. It's what we're here to do, and we're doing it well so far. And knock on wood, thank our lucky stars that things went smooth tonight. Hope it'll stay that way in the upcoming days.
Well, I've got to ask you both about collateral damage. There's a lot of concern about that. A lot of concern about the Iraqi people. We saw a lot of firepower tonight. Tell me how you are working hard to prevent collateral damage.
Kira, we take that into account from step one when we start planning. Collateral damage, obtaining the PID that you need if the situation requires that is always at the forefront of everything we do. We mitigate risk that way. Planning what our DIPs are going to be, what targets we're going to hit, what the collateral damage around it is going to be. And then you couple that with our tactics and the precision that we have with our weapons, and we can control that collateral damage down to the foot.
And Steve, you were saying that you were getting fired upon quite a bit. What kind of strikes were you facing, and how often was it coming at you?
Absolutely. We at first, as we were pressing in, we saw a fair amount of AAA, more than I've seen flying around Iraq before. That gave way to what looked like ballistically guided surface-to-air missiles. And then as we pressed in close to Baghdad, missiles that were actually starting to guide on us. And it's nice to know that the tactics and training that we practiced actually worked. In this case, and the missiles were defeated. They didn't guide towards us, and the whole team that was involved there to keep us safe while we were pushing into the target, came through for us this time. Yeah.
Lieutenant Steve Geary, Lieutenant Lucas Kadar, gentlemen, thank you. I know this is the last time you'll be flying. We'll be checking in with you again. All right, we appreciate it very much. And of course, 24/7 airstrikes continue. The campaign continues in full force off the U.S. Abraham Lincoln and also the two other carriers out here in the Persian Gulf. Lou?
Kira, thank you very much. A terrific interview with those pilots. You said that they had been engaged by MiG-25s. If so, that would be the first report we've had of the Iraqi aircraft getting into the air and engaged. Is that correct? And what was the disposition?
They face a number of threats. Old Soviet fighters, the MiG-25, that's a favorite one, I'm told, by the Iraqi regime. And Lou, quickly, let me ask these pilots specifically. Tonight, did either one of you specifically come in contact or face-to-face or even see MiG-25s out airborne?
No, Iraqis don't like to fly at night, and we didn't see them flying.
Okay.
The MiG-23s, MiG-29s, that was the threat we were going after tonight. 25s are a little bit separate area, but it was a quiet night airways.
All right. The MiG-23 and MiG-29.
Yeah, that's one of the threats that are out here right now.
Okay. 3 types of threats. Guys, thanks. All right, Lou, there you go. That's the best way to answer that question.
A terrific way from the experts themselves. Kira, thank you very much. Kira Phillips from the USS Abraham Lincoln. The bombing campaign today spread well beyond Baghdad. The northern cities of Kirkuk and Mosul were also under heavy attack. And at this hour, there is word that Turkish troops have crossed the border and moved into northern Iraq. Jane Araf is in Duhok, northern Iraq, and has that story for us. Jane?
Lou, we're quite close to the border here. In fact, in between the border and the city of Mosul. And over Mosul, we've been seeing explosions and anti-aircraft tracer fire. Now, as you said, CNN Turk, our sister station, has reported that Turkish troops are entering northern Iraq. They have been here for some time. There have been between 3,000 and 5,000 Turkish troops, and there have been limited numbers of troops as well for the past few years fighting Kurdish separatists. Now, recently they have come in with tanks and other equipment in preparation, they say, for a buffer zone. Now, as you know, this is a subject of a lot of contention, both with the United States and with Kurdish forces, which say that there's no need to have the Turks here, that they will fight them. Now, the U.S. has been trying to defuse the situation. It's not clear what will happen when they enter, but according to Turkish officials, these are not combat troops. They will not fire a single shot, but they do want to provide a buffer zone, they say, to prevent any fighting from spreading and to contain a refugee crisis. Now, Kurdish officials say there's absolutely no need for that. Lou?
Jane, this is a troubling development, certainly for the U.S. government. Secretary of State Colin Powell, in very strong language today, said that the United States wanted a separation on this issue from the permission to overfly Turkish territory. There are about 4 million Kurds in that region. Do we know how large a force is crossing that border at this hour?
Turkey had originally said that it wanted to send twice as many Turkish troops as there would be U.S. troops, and that was when they were envisioning support and approval for 62,000 American troops to enter northern Iraq through Turkey. Now, that is off the table, that deal. Turkish parliament didn't approve it. So also off the table was any American approval of that number of Turkish troops. So it is expected to be a limited number. Some speculative numbers have been around 20,000. Now, as I said, there have been several thousand troops for the past few years in and out of northern Iraq. They say they're chasing Kurdish separatists, and it's been with the implicit agreement of the Kurds and the Iraqi government up until recently. So the forces that will come in, according to Turkey, will be to contain a refugee crisis and to provide security to their own borders. The United States, in recent negotiations, is believed to have obtained commitments from Turkey that it will not enter combat, it will not go further north, that it will try to maintain calm with Kurdish forces. But again, what really counts is what happens on the ground. Lou?
Absolutely. Jana Rao, thank you very much. An update now on the latest developments at this hour. We turn now to Heidi Collins in Atlanta.
Thank you, Lou. Here is the very latest. Baghdad, target of massive Allied airstrikes. U.S. officials say it's the start of an intensive campaign to instill shock and awe in the Iraqi leadership. Other Iraqi cities were also hit hard. Of the many targets in Baghdad, one was the huge Republican Palace complex containing key command and control facilities. Iraqi television broadcast these pictures of what it says is serious bomb damage to a building in Baghdad. Iraqi officials say the building is the Peace Palace, which they say was used for visiting dignitaries. They also say a museum they call the Flowers Palace was also hit. These buildings are not part of the Republican Palace complex. At least 2 American Marines have been killed in combat in Iraq. Both died in southern Iraq as the 1st Marine Division captured the key port city of Qasr and seized oil fields. In other ground operations, Allied forces captured 2 key airfields in western Iraq. Air raid sirens went off in Kuwait City 3 times today. Kuwait has set up multiple shelters at the airport and other buildings, but a CNN investigation has raised questions about their accessibility. CNN found that a number of places designated as shelters were either not being used for the intended purpose or were not open to the general public. Day 2 of the war brought another day of anti-war protests worldwide. In Yemen, police fired on a crowd near the U.S. Embassy. 4 were reported killed. Police and protesters also clashed near the U.S. Embassy in Bahrain, home of the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet. And while Australians were fighting in the Gulf back home, they were blocking the streets in Melbourne to the shriek of mock air raid sirens. As the war against Iraq continues in the Gulf, the war on terrorism continues in the United States. A federal investigation called Operation Green Quest has resulted in 9 arrests in 5 states. Agents seized $120,000 that allegedly could have been used to fund terrorists. The investigation was launched by the Customs Service shortly after the September 11th attacks. And those are the headlines at this hour. Now back to Lou Dobbs.
CNN has learned tonight that the United States is turning to Iraqi expatriates to negotiate the peaceful general surrender of Iraq. Andrea Koppel joins us now from Washington with the story. Andrea?
Lou, we've been hearing for the last day or so from the Pentagon and here at the State Department that U.S. officials are in touch with senior members of the Iraqi military leadership. Well, now CNN has learned that in fact it is members of the Iraqi exile community. We're talking about senior Kurdish officials and former Iraqi military officers who've been facilitating the contact between members of the Republican Guard leadership and CIA operatives, as well as members of the Special Operations Forces. They are talking somewhere in Iraq. It's been going on for the last 24 to 36 hours, and they are talking about how to get as many members of the Iraqi military to surrender, to lay down their arms. As one official told me, he said, look, we don't want to be negotiating 400 separate peace deals. We want to do as few as possible. There has been receptivity to this idea, Lou, but so far no deals have been made. And we should also add as a footnote that it's certainly in U.S. interest to have this psychological element out there. There is no way for us to independently confirm these contacts. Lou.
Andrea, thank you. Turning now to what is a developing story, and that is the movement of Turkish forces, the Turkish military across the northern Iraq border. Is there any reaction from the State Department this evening? Well, Andrea Koppel obviously did not hear me. We will try to go back to find out the answer to that question just as soon as we can do so. Let's turn now to General Don Shepard to take a closer look at today's massive aerial campaign. The General, of course, CNN military analyst, and joins us from CNN Center. General, good to have you with us.
How are you, Lou?
The Pentagon said that we would have shock and awe, and then proceeded to be as good as its word. This was an extraordinary bombing that we watched in Baghdad, but other areas were also hit, Kirkuk, Mosul, even Basra. Give us your best assessment of what the types of aircraft used were and what the ordnance was.
Yeah, I'll be glad to do that, Lou. This was a massive bombing campaign, but at the same time constrained. We've got some baseball cards here. I'll call up the first one, which was the B-52, and show you basically what we did in the way of equipment around the area here. The B-52s can take off from the United Kingdom. They can also take off from Diego Garcia. And they carry what we call CALCMs, conventional air-launched cruise missiles that have a range of about 600 miles. So these missiles are just above the speed of sound. They're very small, hard to detect on radar. The second airplane used today was the B-2 Spirit. This is the vaunted stealth bomber, if you will. It carries JDAMs, Joint Direct Attack Munitions, basically invisible to radar, if you will, or very low signature on radar. It can drop up to 16 of these satellite-guided munitions, very, very accurate. The next airplane was the 117 Nighthawk stealth fighter. The stealth fighter carries laser-guided bombs and now also a new satellite-guided bomb. It carried the GBU-27 before. Now it carries the eGBU-27, which is a satellite-guided version of the bomb, and it's a penetrator. Another thing used today was the Tomahawk missile. Now, this Tomahawk missile can be fired from submarines, destroyers, and cruisers in the Persian Gulf, also in the Red Sea. Could even be fired from the Mediterranean. Again, it's very small, has a range of about 1,000 miles. It's very, very fast, hard to see on the radar. Reportedly, between the B-52 cruise missiles and the Tomahawk missiles, of the 1,000 targets hit today, 600 of them were hit by these missiles, each one of them costing about $1 million apiece. Now let me show you, if I can, what these bunker buster bombs dropped by the 117 stealth fighter do. It's a guided bomb unit, in this case an EGBU-27 satellite guided bomb. It goes down into a bunker, an underground bunker. It penetrates. It senses when it has a void, and then it goes off under the ground. The idea is to get underground and destroy leadership targets. Okay, now in addition to that, we've got some amazing shots from the Keyhole satellite that will show you what I mean by a massive bombing campaign, but also a very constrained bombing campaign. If we can zoom in on the town of Baghdad, you see the Tigris River running through Baghdad, and Baghdad is a large city, about the size of Chicago, about 5 million people, very, very spread out. I'm going to telestrate on this, and I'm going to show you basically the area that was bombed is this area right here. It's an area of military structures, an area of government structures in which there's a lot of command and control and underground bunkers. Now we're going to zoom on, go ahead and zoom further in.
And a number of presidential palaces, as they're referred to as well, on the western side of the Tigris.
Indeed. I'm going to show you those here with some numbered circles. I don't know exactly how many palaces are in there, but there's a main palace down here, Republican Palace. There's several other palaces up here and several ministries as well. We'll zoom in a little bit further here, and I'll show you the area again that was hit more clearly. The area that was hit is an area defined by roads, and the building that you saw hit, and we're going to take a look at later, was basically this building right here. Basically a palace. Now the view we're going to get is from the side. We'll be looking this way, and we will see bombs going off along here in this, and it's just one of the structures that was hit. I don't know if we can zoom back out or not. Well, we'll just take a look at the video here. Basically, this is the video from the bombing today, and you're going to be able to see these bombs going off. You can see them drop from a B-2. Actually, 5 bombs dropped from a B-2 right there, the types that we've been talking about here. So again, this was a very massive bombing campaign, but confined to the government and military area of the city. It was not a carpet bombing of the city and not in the populated areas of the city at all, Lou.
General Myers, both you, General Myers, you and the Secretary of Defense talking about the accuracy of these weapons, which is remarkable. How many more targets can there possibly be if it's command and control and the so-called Special Republican Guard that is billeted in Baghdad?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. First of all, you do bomb damage assessment to see what you hit and if any of these targets that were bombed today need to be restruck. And then it will depend upon where command and control and leadership moves and what happens to the formations of the enemy, the Republican Guard that's left, where they go, where their vehicles go, and those will be struck and restruck until either they surrender or they're gone, Lou.
General, thank you for that elucidating tour of both Baghdad and the improving, certainly my knowledge about the ordnance and the aircraft being used. In terms of Basra, Mosul, Kirkuk, these cities, obviously we do not have cameras in which we are looking at those bombing runs. Is it your assessment that those attacks were just as fierce as today's against Baghdad?
I don't think they were hit as hard or by as many weapons as the Baghdad area. On the other hand, in the area of Basra, most of those strikes down there were to prepare the battlefield for the forces that were crossing the fence between Kuwait and Iraq. They encountered some artillery, they encountered some missiles coming in, and so they essentially cleared those areas out. In Kirkuk and Mosul, I suspect that those were against command and leadership targets up there, as well as deployed forces in that area.
General Don Shepard, we thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Terrific. Thank you. Let's go now back to Wolf Blitzer, who's in Kuwait City, keeping watch. Wolf?
Thanks very much, Lou. A very historic day today, A-Day, the start of the air war. Yesterday, the start of the ground war. It was supposed to be reversed, but we're told now that the commander, General Tommy Franks, decided to move forward with the ground war effectively first because of those oil fields in southern Iraq. So much of Iraq's oil wealth emanates from southern Iraq, as you well know. There was deep concern that the Iraqis were going to start to torch to blow up those oil wells, those oil fields. As a result, U.S. Marines, U.S. Army personnel backed up by British Marines moved very quickly yesterday, a lightning strike into southern Iraq, and they're moving very rapidly up on the road towards Baghdad. Some 100 miles already on the way, but they're also moving elsewhere as well. Special Operations Forces in western Iraq, Special Operations Forces in northern Iraq. Tonight there were these devastating airstrikes against several targets in Baghdad. Shock and awe, the Pentagon calls it. One building that was targeted, the Foreign Ministry, another, the Ministry of Planning. At least 2 presidential palaces were targeted as well. Now, the normal sense, a palace is something you wouldn't normally want to target, but these are command and control facilities that the Iraqi leader has developed over the years. As a result, the U.S. military deemed them worthwhile targets to go after. No sign of Saddam Hussein whatsoever, no sign of his 2 sons. The Defense Secretary, Donald Rumsfeld, basically acknowledging what so many other U.S. officials say. They simply don't know the whereabouts of Saddam Hussein. They don't know if he was injured in that initial strike Wednesday night. They don't know if he's alive. They don't know if he's dead. But I got to tell you, Lou, U.S. intelligence sources, U.S. military personnel, they're looking for him. They want to find him if he's still alive. They're hoping that the shock and awe campaign will indeed convince a lot of Iraqi soldiers to surrender. Lou?
Well, Wolf, very quickly, we now know there are about somewhere between 20 and 30 oil fields in the Ramallah fields, which are just north of you there in Kuwait City. We've looked at satellite photos as well, immense clouds, dark clouds. Can you see those? Are they affecting the environment there in Kuwait City?
No, we have not. I have not had any indication whatsoever that any of the smoke or any of the damage from those oil fields is reaching Kuwait City. It is getting windy here, so maybe that will change. But so far, it doesn't look like the Kuwaitis, at least here in Kuwait City, have been affected by that.
And again, the U.S. military, the British, the coalition military doing a great job of seizing the pipeline that runs through the center of Iraq, the strategic pipeline that could have been the source of even further contamination of the Persian Gulf, as Saddam Hussein ordered it to do in 1991. Well, thank you very much. We've had some reports tonight on the outskirts of Baghdad that other detonations had been heard. At this point, we have seen no sign of further explosions or detonations within at least the reach and the eye of our cameras that we are monitoring this evening. So let's go right now, as we do monitor the night skies over Baghdad, to our senior Pentagon correspondent, Jamie McIntyre. Jamie?
Well, I can tell you, Lou, that the bombing is not over. We will see more bombs dropping in Baghdad and around Iraq, perhaps even extending into the daylight hours, according to one senior official here at the Pentagon. The plan is to drop more than 1,500 precision-guided weapons in the course of the 24 hours of this first 24 hours of this air campaign. Officials here, though, are cautioning that although a lot of things seem to be going the U.S. way early on in this campaign, this war is far from over, and they have yet to get to the most difficult part, which is Baghdad and the Republican Guard, and the question of whether they'll be armed with chemical or biological weapons. Meanwhile, though, Joint Chiefs Chairman General Richard Myers said today that the U.S. is well on the way to meeting some of its objectives.
In the last 24 hours, Special Forces have seized an airfield in western Iraq and have secured border positions in several key locations. Additionally, Navy SEALs and Coalition Special Forces have seized Iraq's 2 major gas and oil terminals in the northern Persian Gulf.
Now, we have seen pictures of Iraqi troops surrendering. We know that the numbers of those surrenders are in the several hundreds at least, but that's really just a small number of Iraqi forces so far who've actually given up to U.S. or coalition troops. Some of them have been significant. CNN has confirmed that the division commander of Iraq's 51st Division in the south, along with his deputy, did surrender to U.S. officials. Most of his division simply kind of melted away, according to U.S. officials. But they're waiting to see, really, for a major amount of surrenders to take place, and that'll wait until the U.S. gets closer to Baghdad and they see what happens with those Republican Guard units. Meanwhile, the U.S. continues to be in contact. They're hopeful that this very significant bombing campaign will send a message that essentially all is lost and that the Iraqi military be better off fighting for the future of Iraq than for Saddam Hussein. At this point, though, no sign that the key generals around Saddam Hussein are either about to defect or to turn on Saddam themselves. Lou?
And Jamie, in terms of the leadership of the 51st, the commander, deputy commander, the 51st the Iraqi 51st Division was the bulwark of the defense in Basra. Is that not correct?
Well, they were sent down to the south to be the line of defense against U.S. troops, but this were not top-of-the-line troops. These were, under-equipped, under-trained, low morale troops that were down at the border. Saddam Hussein's strategy is not to defend his borders, but to put a ring around Baghdad, and so we'll have to wait and see what happens when the U.S. gets to the supposedly better motivated troops.
Jamie McIntyre, as always, thank you very much. Correspondent Frank Buckley, along with photographer Greg Keynes, are aboard the USS Constellation, one of 3 carriers in the Persian Gulf. Let's go to Frank now via video phone. Frank?
Hi there, Lou. If we hear a loud noise during the broadcast here, that's because the USS Constellation is still in the process of recovering aircraft from one of the strike packages that has gone into Iraq from this aircraft carrier. That will be the noise that we will hear if you hear something loud in just a moment here. The very first strike package that was led off the USS Constellation tonight, led by the CAG, the commander of the Air Wing, Captain Mark Fox, went into Iraq, hit in the vicinity of Baghdad, and returned all of the aircraft and the crews returning safely. They were using, as you've been discussing throughout the evening, the precision weapons, either laser-guided weapons or satellite-guided weapons. Sometimes these weapons are called fire and forget weapons because literally the pilot can release the weapon, turn away, and start flying home while the weapon finds its way to the target with some of these weapons. Now, while the weapons may be fire and forget, these are certainly not moments that these aviators will forget anytime soon. We've had an opportunity to talk to several of these flight crews immediately after they've returned from this first mission into Iraq. Here's the impression of one of those aviators of his mission as he went in near Baghdad.
We came in and immediately could see the TLAM impacting in downtown Baghdad and just continuous constant explosions going off all over the place. You saw the AAA coming up. Occasionally you see some missile bursts. And then basically as the air package flew in, you could see missiles coming off our aircraft, other members of the package coming in, and just tremendous amount of activity on the ground, coming up through the air, and of course coming down from us.
And we should also tell you that separately that we've heard from Rear Admiral Barry Costello, the Constellation Battle Group commander, that all 30 or so of the ships and submarines, U.S. Navy warships in this region that were capable of launching Tomahawks have engaged, and all of them have launched at least one Tomahawk during this day. Lou?
Frank Buckley aboard the Constellation, thank you very much. Coalition air bases in the Persian Gulf today saw, as you might expect, plenty of action. Bob Franken, photographer Jerry Simonson at one such base that we cannot disclose near the Iraqi border, and Bob joins us now via video phone. Bob?
Well, it's also noisy here, although it's for the moment quiet. But throughout the night, there have been hundreds of missions that have been flown from here, jets screaming from this air base, a large air base, which combines F-16s, F-A-18s, which, as you know, Lou, are fighter jets. You can see there's been a parade of planes taking off. A-10s, those are the ones that are so vicious against the tanks, all going out, spreading out across Iraq, not just Baghdad, which of course we all watched on television, but wreaking havoc throughout the entire country as the United States began its A-Day pretty much here. This was really quite the launching point, and it was really quite interesting, as a matter of fact. You can hear there's just a steady parade of planes that's been going on for hours. The planes going out, planes coming in. Anyway, throughout the last couple of days, there have been any number of alerts, red alerts they've called them, because of the fear of some sort of gas attack. Well, after hours of launching of jets this evening, there was one more. This time it was a yellow alert. Somebody decided that attack was probable, and for about 10 minutes or so, everybody was required to put on his chem-bio suits and head for shelter. Somebody finally decided that maybe there wasn't such a probability, and the alert was lifted. So tensions still are high, but the tensions are certainly being released by what the United States government has decided, Lou, to call A-Day.
Bob Franken, thank you very much. As General Richard Myers today said, a great deal of work remains to be done by the U.S., British, Australian, and coalition military. The massive assault on Baghdad all but wiped out any vestige of fear on Wall Street, at least for today. The Dow soared 235 points, the Dow at 85.22, the Dow gaining more than 8% this week. That is the best performance by the Dow Jones Industrials in more than 20 years. In fact, since October of 1982, and by point of reference, that is the year the bull market began. And the price of oil in the midst of conflict dropping more than $1 a barrel as coalition forces secured the Iraqi oil fields and terminals. Oil prices have now tumbled more than $10 in less than 2 weeks, and the fact is that matches the decline of the 1991 Gulf War with the onset of action. Joining me now from Washington, former Secretary of Defense, Moneyline regular contributor William Cohen. Bill, this is by any standard, I don't think I even have to ask an expert like you, but by any standard, I have to believe this has been a remarkable success to this point.
It's been a historic day and 2 days. I don't think anyone's ever seen this kind of combined power, air, land, and sea, focus in this way to target those military sites and to take them out with this kind of precision. I think everyone should stand in awe of and in pride for those young people who are out there. When you see how young they are and talented and professional and capable, you have an immense sense of pride for our forces. Also a profound sense of sorrow for the Iraqi people who are trapped under that heel and boot of Saddam Hussein. So we're hoping that this kind of shock and awe will produce a more rapid result than otherwise would take place.
Yeah, Secretary of State Colin Powell today said a free Iraq is inevitable. And as you point out, the young men and women serving, as we went to Kara Phillips and to Frank Buckley and to Bob Franken and the various correspondents who are with our troops, the young men and women, their youth, their determination, truly remarkable. Bill, this development tonight in Turkey, with the Turkish troops crossing over the border, tell us exactly how serious you think that is, how big a potential problem.
Well, Lou, you and I discussed this last evening, and I see it as a major problem to the extent that the Turks insist on putting significant numbers into that so-called buffer zone. Turkey could have avoided all of this by allowing the United States to move through its facilities, through Incirlik and elsewhere, into northern Iraq to provide not only our forces to protect our forces there, but also to provide protection against any kind of Kurdish action against the Turks and vice versa. I think they're making a big mistake.
Bill, is it, in your judgment, a flashpoint, a potential flashpoint?
If the Turks put large numbers there, yes, I think the Kurds will respond militarily. Then it puts everybody in a very difficult position, which I think is the reason why the State Department is voicing its concern so strenuously.
The prospect of surrender here, a general surrender being negotiated by expatriates, of Iraqi expatriates, also through third parties, other third parties. What is the likelihood, your best assessment as we wrap up here?
Best assessment, it'll take a few more days at least with a continuation of this type of bombing and military activity. I don't think you'll see a collapse of the Iraqi regime just yet, but I think this kind of information is certainly a welcome information, and hopefully it will proceed apace, but I think it's going to take longer.
Bill Cohen, thank you very much. Well, Donald Rumsfeld today said he did not know whether Saddam Hussein is still in control of Iraq. Iraqi state television broadcast pictures of what it says is Saddam Hussein meeting Friday with his son Qusay. Our national security correspondent David Inzer reports from Washington.
This time, Iraqi television showed Saddam Hussein with his son Qusay, saying he remains firmly in control. But U.S. officials said the pictures could just as easily be old. Such meetings are a staple of Iraqi TV. U.S. intelligence officials say Saddam could be injured or even dead. Whether or not he's alive, Bush administration officials say his grip on power is slipping.
The regime is starting to lose control of their country. The confusion of Iraqi officials is growing. Their ability to see what is happening on the battlefield, to communicate with their forces, and to control their country is slipping away.
Mr. Secretary, do you believe Saddam Hussein is currently in control of Iraq?
I don't know.
Sources say since the strikes Thursday morning against Saddam Hussein's compound, intelligence headquarters, and a Republican Guard facility, there has been a marked drop in Iraqi leadership communications monitored by U.S. intelligence. Saddam Hussein, a knowledgeable official says, is not communicating orders and can no longer trust anybody. Even deciding where and whether to sleep at night, he said, is a fateful choice for the Iraqi leader. As for the tape released hours after the attack on his compound, in which Saddam mentions the date of the attack, it is Saddam, the White House says. The question is, when?
The tape has been analyzed by the Central Intelligence Agency, and their analysis has led them to believe that the tape is indeed the voice of Saddam Hussein, but no conclusions have been reached about whether it was canned ahead of time or not.
A senior intelligence official tells CNN he believes Saddam Hussein was in that compound early Thursday morning, along with at least one of his sons, when the U.S. dropped tons of munitions on it. But the official says the U.S. simply does not know whether Saddam survived, and if so, whether he's been injured. Welcome, this official said to me, to the fog of war. Lou?
David Enzer, thank you very much, our national security correspondent, for lifting at least part of that fog. As we just reported, it's unclear whether Saddam Hussein is dead or alive. One key question surrounds the potential capture of Saddam. Would it be legal to assassinate him? To discuss the political intent behind those operations, we're joined by senior political analyst Bill Snyder. Bill,
well,
good to have you here.
The U.S. goal, we say, is decapitation, not assassination, and there's a reason for that. Back during the Cold War, the CIA did get involved in plots to assassinate leaders of other countries, like Ngo Dinh Diem in Vietnam, and we even talked about poisoning Fidel Castro's cigar. But when news of this protest got out, the Senate investigated, Congress almost passed a law to ban political assassinations, but then Gerald Ford came in, issued an executive order, and that executive order made political assassinations illegal as of 1976. The fact that it was an executive order is important because that executive order can be repealed by any president, and the Bush administration thought about doing that after September 11th. But it turned out that was unnecessary because the order allows targeting an enemy combatant if the United States is engaged in armed conflict. A terrorist like Osama bin Laden is an enemy combatant, and so is Saddam Hussein because he's the commander-in-chief of the Iraqi armed forces. Targeting an enemy combatant is not an act of assassination, it's an act of war. Lou?
Snyder, thank you very much.
Sure.
Joining me now, our CNN military analyst, General David Grange. David, good to have you with us. Dave, are you there, Dave? Well,
I'm here.
You're here. Okay. I just wanted to make certain.
Yeah, communication is just like in war.
And we get a little foggy from time to time here.
Yeah.
Dave, the 50 in Basra, that unit, the 51st Iraqi Division, its commander, it's unclear here. The commander, deputy commander have surrendered, but it's not entirely clear that the entire division has surrendered to the Marines in that area. What do you make of it?
Well, that's right. You know, his unit's probably split up, and some probably don't have the word because the communication is so terrible. But one thing about the, I'd like to say, Lou, at the end here, at the shock and awe, as we see all these aerial bombardments, is that the shock and awe of this coalition force is not only the airstrikes, but hearing that 70-ton tank rumble down to your position, or looking at that British commando or that U.S. Marine with that bayonet on the end of his rifle.
A wonderful point, and if I may ask you, as we are getting near the end of our hour, Dave, the issue of the progress of this advance, it seems awfully good to most of us. Is the Pentagon satisfied with the rate of advance?
Well, it's hard to say. Is on advancement, the movement, and that's moving with the operations as you move, called tempo, can be fast or slow depending on the situation. And you're always going to have discussions between commanders on you're not moving fast enough, you're moving too slow, do you bypass units and take the risk because you need to keep the momentum, keep the shock. And I'm sure that debate is going on how fast you do this type of operation.
Well, it's impressive to most of us, I would say. It's safe to say. How about you?
Well, it's hard to say unless you're right there on the ground with these guys, but I think the key is to move quick and keep the shock and the momentum up and take a little bit of risk.
General Dave Grange, thank you very much, as always. I'm Lou Dobbs. For all of us here, thanks for being with us. Our coverage of the strike on Iraq continues now with Aaron Brown.
Lou, thank you very much, and good evening again, everyone. It's been an eventful day. I know many of you are just getting home from work, particularly here in the East, but also across the country as well. It has been a day of extraordinary events, and from the U.S. point of view, as articulated by the Secretary of Defense, of extraordinary accomplishment. Over the next couple of hours, we'll be joined by Wolf Blitzer, who is in Kuwait. Many aspects, many strains of this story to work our way through, but we begin by getting you caught up on the highlights, the headlines, if you will, of this day, and CNN's Heidi Collins. Heidi?
Coming up in 90 seconds, more with Aaron Brown as he anchors our coverage of the strike on Iraq. But first, the latest headlines at this hour. This is shock and awe. It began 6 hours ago, the bombs falling in waves of varying intensity. After a lull, there have been new strikes on the outskirts of Baghdad within the past hour. In these initial stages, the Pentagon said it expects to slam Baghdad as well as two northern cities with some 1,500 cruise missiles, smart bombs, and other weaponry. They're being fired by jets over Iraq as well as the naval forces surrounding the country. Iraqi TV says this is what it looked like at ground level. This is said to be the Peace Palace, part of the sprawling government compound in the heart of Baghdad. Iraqi officials also said one of yesterday's strikes hit the home of Iraqi President Saddam Hussein, but reported no casualties. The Pentagon says 6 Americans have died in the invasion. 2 Marines were killed fighting in southern Iraq today. 4 Americans died in yesterday's helicopter accident that also killed 12 British commandos. On the charge to Baghdad today, the Marines and the Army have met little opposition rolling north through the desert. You're seeing the soldiers in the 3rd Infantry, along with residents of the mostly Muslim town of Safwan in Iraq. It's not far from the Safwan airfield, where the 1991 ceasefire took place. And CNN's Andrea Koppel reports the CIA and military are using Iraqi expatriates to negotiate the possible surrender of top members of the Republican Guard. U.S. and British troops now report seizing territory in western Iraq, 2 airfields there, and southern territory, home to many of Iraq's oil fields. The charge north is now just about halfway to Baghdad. In the north, a new complication, though. CNN has learned that Turkish soldiers have gone into Iraq against U.S. wishes. The U.S. invasion of Iraq was strongly condemned today by Iraq's ambassador to the UN. Speaking in New York, Mohammed El-Douri also blasted the UN for withdrawing its inspectors and aid programs. Also in the U.S., CNN has learned new details about a Saudi man sought by law enforcement. Sources consider Adnan al-Shukrajuma, quote, a serious player and possibly an integral role in an al-Qaeda plot. The 27-year-old reportedly was mentioned in documents found during anti-terror raids. Now to strike in Iraq, live from the front lines.
Shock and awe.
Making progress. We will stay on task until we've achieved our objective.
We're probably watching something that is somewhat historic. It is now inevitable that there will be a change.
Live from Baghdad, Kuwait, Washington, New York, and other cities around the globe. The strategy, the results, the reaction in the streets, and the sacrifice of war.
This really makes the war more personal, this war.
Strike on Iraq, live from the front lines.
It's 3 a.m. on what can only be described as a harrowing, frightening night for the 5 million residents of Baghdad. It may look quiet in these pictures right now, but within the past half hour, witnesses reporting new detonations on the outskirts of the city. Tonight in Baghdad, there is no such thing as peace. Earlier, a city skyline was transformed by war, modern warfare. The opening phase of a massive bombing campaign on targets all across the country of Iraq. The ones we see best are, of course, the ones in Baghdad where our cameras are. The bombs continue to fall. U.S. ground forces continue to push farther into the country. So far, they have faced little resistance, but little is not the same as none. There have been American casualties. As we said, if you're just getting home, you haven't seen these scenes before, we'll show you what went down from the sky, quite literally what came down, rained down from the sky as it came down in just a few minutes. Good evening again, everyone. It's good to be with you again for another long night of our special coverage of Strike on Iraq, live from the front lines. I'm Aaron Brown at the CNN Center in Atlanta. We'll be joined over the next couple of hours from Kuwait by our friend and colleague, CNN's Wolf Blitzer. And Wolf, we'll start with you tonight. It's good to see you.
Thank you very much, Aaron. The Pentagon is calling this A-Day, the opening day of an aerial bombing campaign designed to shock and awe the Iraqi leadership. It was just amazing. Before we go any further, we want our viewers to see what exactly happened almost exactly 6 hours ago, shortly after dark in this part of the world.
بينما نتابع هذه الصور المروعة من بغداد، البوريني محمد خير البوريني، هل تسمعنا؟
أخي عدنان أسمعك وأسمع القصف الشديد الذي يبدو تتعرض له بغداد والمقاومات الأرضية أيضا. هذا ما كان قد حدث في عام 98 وفي عام 91 أيضا. لدينا هنا في منطقة الموصل عدنان يبدو أن الغارات التي كنا نشاهدها قبل قليل قد بدأت. نتابع الأجواء هنا وسنوافيكم بكل التفاصيل تباعا.
نعم محمد، طبعا
فلا مانع.
ابقى معنا، سنحاول الحديث إلى زملائنا في بغداد. نتابع تقديم هذه الصور مباشرة من هناك بعد أن رأينا الانفجارات العنيفة التي ربما تكون الصورة أبلغ من أي حديث يمكن أن نقوله عما يجري في بغداد ديار العمري. يبدو أن زملائنا في بغداد ما زالوا في المخابئ. هل يمكن القول إلا أن بغداد تتعرض لهذه الهجمة؟ بغداد تحترق، ماذا يمكن أن نقول؟
Hundreds of Tomahawk cruise missiles and satellite-guided bombs, 2,000-pound bombs, hitting various targets in Baghdad. Journalist Maying Welsh heard the air raid sirens, climbed inside a truck for cover, and had a terrifying front row seat as the bombs fell. She's okay. Fortunately, she's joining us now by phone. May, thanks very much. First of all, right now, what's happening in Baghdad as far as you can tell?
Well, it's very quiet here right now, Wolf. There's absolutely nothing going on. Perhaps about 20 minutes ago, there was some bombing and some anti-aircraft fire to the south. I'm in the city center right now, to the south and also to the east. But since that time, there's really been nothing. Nothing that I can see or hear. It might be going on further away, but we can't see it or hear it here.
Were the main targets today those government ministries, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, some of the presidential palaces? Are they near where you are right now?
Yes, the foreign ministry is very close to where I am, and I can see the smoke coming out of it.
Describe a little bit to our viewers around the world what it felt like to be in Baghdad as this A-Day bombing campaign began.
It was shocking and awesome. It was horrifying. I was actually on the roof of the building from which you took this footage when it happened. And it was so close that our entire building just shook. And, I mean, to see something like that so close to you, and with explosions continuing, you really get the feeling that at any second it can happen to you. And you wonder also, the impact is so huge, you wonder also if it can affect you just by being so close to it. I was running away from it. I ran down the stairs. At first I was very shocked by it and mesmerized, and I couldn't sort of take my eyes off it. And then people started yelling at me, "Get down, get down!" And that's when we all started running down the stairs. But even once we were out on the street, away from the building, which we feared would be hit, it was still terrifying because we could see the missiles going over our heads. We could see these explosions happening around. It just looked like they were going to blow up all of Baghdad. That's how it looked, and that's how it felt. So it was it sort of felt like there was no place to hide.
May, it was approximately 9 p.m. local time, Friday night, in Baghdad at the end of the Muslim holy day when this bombing campaign happened. What were people doing, average Iraqis? There are some 5 million who live in Baghdad. What were they doing at the time?
Most Iraqis are staying in their homes. They're not even venturing out to the shelters. Some people have shelters within their homes, and they're going downstairs to those. Some people have even dug shelters in their backyards, primitive shelters. But people are a little bit afraid to go to some of the freestanding shelters. People are staying in their homes. That's what they're doing.
Maying Welsh, thanks for joining us, and fortunately you're okay. We appreciate it very much. Aaron, back to you.
Thanks. We might mention here that the familiar voice of Nick Robertson, who had been in Baghdad for us, won't be heard for a while. Nick and the entire CNN group was expelled. Excuse me, they're making their way out of the country today. No easy task, that, by the way, but we won't be hearing from Nick. Jamie McIntyre at the Pentagon. We have some news now to report from there. Jamie?
Well, Aaron, we heard earlier that the commander of the Iraq 51st Division and his deputy had surrendered to U.S. forces as they approached Basra. This is the Iraqi division that is aligned down in the south and essentially to provide defense of the southern border. Now we're hearing that essentially the entire division has surrendered. This would be the most significant surrender so far, because up till now we'd only heard that there have been several hundred Iraqi troops surrendering in small groups here and there. This would be the first time an entire Iraqi division. And while this division is not the best equipped, not the best trained, and has some low morale, Saddam Hussein does not put his best forces along the perimeter of the country. Nevertheless, it is a regular Army division that surrendered. Now, an Iraqi division in the U.S. Army division might be anything from 18 to 20,000 troops. An Iraqi division is considerably smaller. It's hard to say exactly how many would have been in this division, but maybe 8 or 10,000 at the most, probably some number less than that. But nevertheless, it shows that the U.S. campaign to try to convince Iraqi troops to surrender is at least working to some degree in the south, where the troops are essentially not as well equipped and well trained and don't have as good morale. Aaron?
And as it turns out, not especially motivated. What is the procedure now? Now all of a sudden the U.S. military has 8,000 soldiers, enemy soldiers, to deal with, to care for and feed and in some level control.
Well, First of all, I'm not sure that 8,000 is the right number. I think some number of people just sort of defect. They just sort of run away, so they don't necessarily turn themselves in. But what they're doing is they take their weapons, they let the officers keep their sidearms if they want. They basically sort of tell them to stay in their barracks. They put the U.S. troops around them. They don't treat them necessarily as prisoners of war in a big concentration camp, but they basically isolate them, and as long as they don't seem to be threatening and that they still seem to have some respect for the authority of their officers, they sort of leave them there. I'm not sure what's going on in this specific instance. It depends really a lot on the mood of the soldiers, what the commanders said, and just a sense of whether they present much of a threat. The U.S. would like to try to avoid having to clothe, feed, provide medical attention for hundreds of thousands of prisoners, at least in the initial stages. As soon as they get control of the country, then they do plan to bring humanitarian aid in and take better care of people.
I'm sorry, Jamie, thank you. I know you'll be trying to figure out more about exactly the numbers in play, where they are, and what happens to them. Thank you, Jamie McIntyre at the Pentagon. Retired General Wesley Clark is with us again this evening. We'll be throughout the evening. It's just one question on what just happened, and I'd like to go back to what happened 6 hours or so ago. This sort of thing is not unanticipated by the Central Command, this sort of surrendering of a large group.
No, they're looking for it, and the more the better. We're carrying 20 to 30 Iraqi divisions on their order of battle. So this is the first that we know of that a division commander has surrendered. So we've got lots more to go. But we do have certain responsibilities under the Geneva Convention. We can't allow them to be, for example, massacred by the local Shiites who might not like these troops. And we can't leave them in the barracks to starve. And we certainly don't want to set up a situation where the weapons that they turned in then get redistributed to other elements. So we've got some responsibilities we cannot escape in this.
So it's a welcome development, but it's not a development without some challenges, as it were.
Big challenges.
On its own. Now, back to earlier in the evening, 9 o'clock in the evening in Baghdad, when it started to rain down. Was there anything, as you saw it, surprising about the time of the attack, the length of the attack, the way it played out?
Not really. The attack came during a period of zero illumination. It was delivered by a combination of cruise missiles and stealth aircraft. There was some Iraqi resistance to it. It hit military targets, despite, you can't quite tell in the pictures what it's hitting, but as you look at the aerial view, and we've been through that today, these were military targets in the palace. Wasn't a lot of collateral damage done. It's right on the money. It's exactly the way it should go.
We're about 3 hours away from daybreak in Iraq, and obviously everyone's going to get a better sense of what happened once the sun comes up. Wolf, why don't you weigh in this conversation as well?
Thanks very much, Aaron. General, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs said he expects to see several hundred more of these airstrikes within hours. We're only seeing a small piece of the action in Baghdad, and even in Baghdad a limited amount of activity, but in Mosul and Kirkuk, elsewhere around the country, I assume similar kind of airstrikes are unfolding right now.
I would think they are, Wolf, because what the United States has to do here to be effective is to take out the Iraqis' command and control, their radar stations, their early reporting control nodes, the surface-to-air missile networks, their airfields, their repair facilities, all as rapidly as possible so you deliver the maximum shock to the air defense and command and control system and eliminate any impediment to the U.S. use of the skies, and that's what the aim will be.
One of the things I read that I found interesting is just talking about airfields, for example. They'd like to take them out of commission without destroying them completely, because they only will then have to be rebuilt again, and that's time-consuming and difficult and all the rest. And that's part of the challenge of a commander who's designing the war plan in terms of choice of weapons and the rest?
That's right. The air staff does this. He's got an air component commander. He's got a complete battle staff that's planning this. They're located currently in Saudi Arabia. They were prepared to locate elsewhere in Qatar. And this is a science that's been practiced and worked over a lot. Now, for example, one of the things you want to do is you want to go after the aircraft shelters that are on the base rather than the runways, if you think you can. Of course, their counter move is to take things out of the shelters and disperse them. But here's where the Iraqis have an environmental problem. Unlike the Serbs, they don't have a lot of grass and tree cover and environmental protection. If they leave it out of the shelter, it's out there. So get the airplanes if you can, get the shelters, take things out of that, and then do minimal damage to the runways.
Wolf, am I right that in the first Gulf War, the Iraqis pretty much parked all their aircraft somewhere over near the Iranian border?
Well, they flew about 100 of them over the border for safekeeping, and they're still in Iran right now. The Iranians have no intention of returning those aircraft, some of which the best that the Iraqi Air Force had. They thought it was safer to move them to Iran than to keep them in Iraq, where they were being destroyed one by one during the first Gulf War. General, as you well know, going into this first night of the air campaign, A-Day as it's being called, there was a lot of speculation that it would begin not only with this kind of massive bombing strike, but that the U.S. had some sort of secret microwave bomb that would take out all of the communications capabilities, electricity, the power grids of not only Baghdad but elsewhere. We saw none of that. In fact, you're seeing the lights shining brightly in most of Baghdad right now. Were you surprised by that development?
I wasn't sure, Wolf, that we actually had this weapon, but if we have this weapon, it wasn't clear that this would be the right time to use it. If we were still trying to communicate to the Iraqis, if we were still working psychological operations against them, and if we still wanted to protect the civilian infrastructure, this might have been an inappropriate use of the weapon. If we've got it, maybe we want to save it until the decisive moment of the battle for Baghdad.
General Clark, you'll be around all evening long. We'll make you work pretty hard tonight. Thank you. General Wesley Clark, the former Supreme NATO commander, with us as we go. These air attacks came from the sea, literally, from ships at sea, from submarines throwing cruise missiles, and from air bases in Kuwait. We won't locate the air base, but we'll tell you that Bob Franken is at one of them, embedded with the group there, and Bob joins us now from Kuwait. Bob?
A very large operation here, one of the primary air bases in the region, that is close to the Iraq border, and it was put to extensive use tonight for several hours. There was the sound of screaming jets, just one after another, heading off to Iraq, heading throughout the country, spreading out to wreak havoc, to drop the bombs. There were the fighter planes, there were the anti-tank planes, there were the variety of other planes that make up the contingent here. They were going throughout the night. It was quite a sight. Right now it's relatively quiet, of course you can hear the noise, but for this moment there are not planes taking off, although there are consistently ones, and there will continue to be ones. As we heard just a moment ago, there are expected to be several hundred other airstrikes before the first day of this is over. Now, we don't have an exact number from this base, but it was quite large. Now, at the same time, the tension continues at this base because of its proximity to the Iraq border. There have been any number of alerts here, people fearing that there was going to be a chemical attack have sounded the alarm. We've talked about that, Aaron. And even after these attacks were well underway, another alarm went off, but it quickly went away, and thus far there have been none since that time. Still, the planes come and go, and they're going to be going well into the night and well into the next several days. Aaron?
Thank you. There's about, 2-3 hours more of darkness there, to the extent that darkness matters in the decision-making process. We're a couple of hours still before dawn, right?
That's right. Now, the moon has been relatively full here, so it is not the optimum condition for the coalition forces. They like the cover of darkness because of all the stealth and all the technology that they have, but nevertheless, they just put out full force tonight, even with the moon.
Bob, thank you. Bob Franken, who's at an air base in Kuwait, embedded with the units there. We'll be hearing from a lot of our embedded correspondents as the evening goes along. Wolf, as Bob was talking, I noticed one of the supers on the screen that first attack lasted 7 minutes. I can't imagine, if you're a resident of Baghdad, that is not the longest 7 minutes of your life.
It had to be terrifying for all those 5 million people. And many of the eyewitnesses, the journalists who have been on the air talking about it, say it was just that thunderous sound. The earth felt like it was shaking, and I'm sure it was. These were powerful, powerful bombs that were going off, trying to destroy those bunkers underneath those buildings, trying to go deep deep down, certainly they were hoping to capture Republican Guard leadership as well as the leadership of the Iraqi government. Of course, many of the warplanes that moved on Baghdad, other targets inside Iraq, came from not only air bases on the ground, but from aircraft carriers, 3 of which are in the Persian Gulf, 2 of which are in the Eastern Mediterranean. The USS Constellation is in the Persian Gulf. That's where we find CNN's Frank Buckley. He's joining us now live. Frank?
Wolf, the flight operations are continuing here aboard the USS Constellation, but we can tell you that the first strike packages that went into Iraq have returned safely. The evening began for those pilots, those naval aviators going in on the first strikes with briefings. We sat in on the first one that was led by Mark Fox, Captain Mark Fox, the CAG, who is the commander of the air wing on this carrier. We had tremendous access to hear what he had to say to the men that he would be leading into the vicinity of Baghdad.
We successfully accomplished our mission. We did everything that we set out to do. Everybody's back safe and sound from the first wave. I've got another wave that's out, that's going, and another wave that's coming back right now. So we're in this we're at added hammer and tong.
And after the first strike, we talked to the CAG there, as you just saw. We also talked to other aviators who gave us a sense, a description of what they were able to see and experience as they rolled into Baghdad.
We came in and immediately could see the TLAM impacting in downtown Baghdad, and just continuous, constant explosions going off all over the place. You saw the AAA coming up. Occasionally you see some missile bursts. And then basically, as the air package flew in, you could see missiles coming off our aircraft, other members of the package coming in, and just tremendous amount of activity on the ground, coming up through the air, and of course coming down from us.
There's a lot of satisfaction expressed by the flight crews with their performance. They felt that their weapons fired properly. They were especially gratified, of course, that all of them, at least in the initial packages, returned safely. As we say, flight operations are still underway. Still, they know that the weapons that they do release are going down. They're causing a great deal of destruction, possibly death. These are human beings, and I asked one of the pilots about his personal feelings about it.
On a personal level, I'd say you just tell yourself, for one thing, if it wasn't me that was doing it, it'd be somebody else. I'm going to get in and do the job as best I can so nobody else has to go in and do it, either do it later again to clean up my mess or, fix something that I messed up. So.
One additional note, Wolf, Rear Admiral Barry Costello, the Constellation Battle Group commander, tells us that all of the ships and submarines, all the U.S. Navy warships anyway, that were capable of firing Tomahawks did indeed launch Tomahawks. That's 30-plus ships in the Persian Gulf in the Red Sea. Wolf?
Frank Buckley aboard the USS Constellation. We had heard that almost 400 Tomahawk cruise missiles were fired during those critical hours. Today, an Illinois family is dealing with one of the worst aspects of war, indeed the worst aspect, the loss of a loved one. Pilot Captain Ryan Beaupre died when his helicopter accidentally crashed about 9 miles south of Qasr, killing 8 British troops and 4 U.S. Marines. The Sea Knight helicopter was part of the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force from Camp Pendleton. Beaupre's sister says the family was notified of his death this morning. She says he called her before his unit was sent out from Camp Pendleton. Beaupre's family says he was a wonderful pilot who was doing his job. Aaron?
I just stay on that. If you can go back to that face for a second, that young man carrying out such difficult work. As Frank Buckley was talking a couple of moments ago, we noticed some young sailors walking behind him doing what people do, and there's a camera in front of him waving. I suspect around America today there were plenty of people who wanted to wave back. This is tough work. These men and women are engaged in tough and dangerous work. Coming up in this half hour still, we have much to cover, and in many respects, many things we don't know because the story unfolds as we go. The war timeline, questions of how long the fighting might last, when the U.S. troops might go home. It seems awfully early in the game to be talking about coming home. There's a long road yet to go. Around the world, protests still more violent today. The outcry against the war spilling into countries around the world, particularly in Arab countries, but many here in the United States also. And coming up in the next hour, Saddam Hussein, is he still alive? That is an incredibly complicated question for military analysts and intelligence analysts to deal with, an important one. We'll be dealing with that as well. First, we go to Heidi Collins to take a brief look at what is happening at this hour.
Thanks, Aaron. Checking the headlines at this hour, the U.S.-led coalition's much-talked-about shock and awe bombing campaign got underway today in Iraq. U.S. military officials say they expect to unleash about 1,500 satellite-guided bombs and missiles across Iraq in the first 24 hours of the campaign. We spoke to a U.S. Air Force pilot involved in the strike via telephone, videophone that is. CNN has learned the U.S. is working with Iraqi expatriates to facilitate a peaceful surrender of Iraq. The expatriates are said to include Kurdish leaders and former military commanders. An administration official tells CNN they've been having face-to-face talks with senior members of the Iraqi Republican Guard over the last 24 to 36 hours. Our sister network, CNN Turk, reports that about 1,000 Turkish troops have crossed the border from Turkey into Iraq. The Turkish government says the troops are on a humanitarian mission. Government sources tell CNN federal authorities are looking at a possible link between a wanted Saudi man and dirty bomb suspect Jose Padilla. The FBI has issued a worldwide alert for Adnan al-Shukrajima. Authorities think he may be involved with an al-Qaeda plot to attack U.S. interests. Northwest Airlines says the war in Iraq has lowered passenger demand, forcing job cuts. Northwest is laying off 4,900 workers and cutting flights by 12%. But thanks to investors counting on a short war with few casualties, the Dow Jones today closed out its best weekly performance since 1982. Blue chips gained 662 points this week. And we'll be back in just a moment. For now, we will go back to, I believe, Wolf Blitzer in Baghdad.
Welcome back to our continuing coverage of the strike on Iraq. I'm Wolf Blitzer reporting live tonight from Kuwait City. CNN's Andrea Koppel, our State Department correspondent, is getting new information on negotiations, talks, if you will, ongoing negotiations between the United States government and Iraqi military officers through third parties. Andrea, tell our viewers what you have.
Well, Wolf, these negotiations, I'm told, have been going on for the last 24 to 36 hours. And what's interesting about them, I'm sure our viewers remember hearing Secretary Rumsfeld yesterday say that the U.S. had contacts with Iraqi military officials, but he didn't say how. Well, CNN has learned that the conduit for these negotiations are Iraqi exiles, Iraqi dissidents, if you will, some of whom are former senior Iraqi military generals, officials themselves in the military, and others Kurdish leaders. And what they've been doing is they have helped CIA operatives and also special ops forces, some representatives from them, to get together with Republican guards. Now, these are supposed to be either special Republican guards and regular Republican guards. But the question, Wolf, is whether or not these individuals are speaking for themselves when they talk about wanting to defect or wanting to lay down their arms, or whether they're speaking for a vast number of Iraqi military officials. And so that has been the dilemma. In fact, just today, Secretary Rumsfeld again said that one of the reasons for the pause in the bombing campaign, among the reasons, were these negotiations. They wanted to see how they'd come, whether or not they'd bear any fruit, and in fact, they have not as yet. But today, Secretary Powell himself actually alluded to the fact that there are all kinds of contacts going on right now between the United States and Baghdad.
There are a number of channels open to Baghdad. There are a number of individuals and countries around the world who have been conveying the message to the Iraqi regime that it is now inevitable, that there will be a change.
And now, of course, CNN has learned that the Iraqi expatriates have been the ones who have been facilitating these face-to-face negotiations that are still going on inside Iraq between U.S. representatives, both from Special Ops and the CIA, as well as with senior Iraqi military officials. Wolf.
Andrea, this is a development that obviously is one welcomed by U.S. officials, but what do they really expect will happen as far as the elite Republican Guard, not just the rank-and-file Iraqi military, but the Republican Guard, the Special Security Forces that have always been considered the most likely to fight and die in urban warfare, whether it's in Baghdad or in Tikrit, the hometown of Saddam Hussein?
Well, certainly there were not high hopes going into the war that the Special Republican Guards or the elite Republican Guards would defect. These are the ones who are the best paid. They get the most benefits from Saddam Hussein and really are the most trusted among all of the Republican Guard units. In fact, they were formed after the Persian Gulf War to keep Saddam Hussein really encircled, embraced, if you will, in this protective unit. So it remains to be seen. It certainly would be extraordinary if, in fact, Special Republican Guard units were negotiating with the United States for some sort of surrender, some sort of laying down of their arms. Wolf.
All right, Andrea Koppel at the State Department, thanks very much. Aaron, it's one thing for a regular Army division, 8,000 Iraqi troops, regular forces to surrender. It would certainly be another thing for those elite Republican Guard divisions to surrender. That certainly has not yet happened, although you never know, it might.
Well, however it happens, one of the great frustrations of those of us who do daily journalism is the historians get to write all the details of what those talks are going on. As we were talking, General Clark passed me a note to say that during the Kosovo campaign that he ran, there were similar sorts of talks going on. And one of the things you have to figure out is if the people you're talking to can, in fact, deliver the goods. And that's all part of what's going on now. It's about 3:30 in the morning in Baghdad. As you can see in the big frame, it is quiet there. Whether it will stay quiet until the sun comes up, we'll just watch and see, literally watch and see. There are plenty of things to talk about other than that. U.S. officials here at home are worried about another group of oil wells. There's been so much talk about the oil fields in Iraq. In this case, they're worried about the oil fields in the United States. It turns out now that we can report that security at oil refineries around the United States is considered very tight tonight. Homeland Security alert now at level orange, as you know. There's concern that the refineries could be among the targets that terrorists may strike should they decide that the war is a reasonable provocation to do so. CNN's Ed Lavandera has spent the day looking at the effort to protect refineries. He's in the port of Houston now. Ed, good to see you tonight.
Hi, Aaron. Well, what you see behind me is the Houston Ship Channel. You head up the water just that direction toward the skyline back there, and that is Houston. You head out the other way, and that takes you out to the Gulf of Mexico. Virtually every major oil company works on this stretch of water. This is a 53-mile stretch of water that runs from Galveston all the way up to the southern edges of the city of Houston. There are about 700 ships that make their way through this body of water every day, and we spent part of the morning today with the Coast Guard. They've told us that in the last couple of days, even more so since 9/11, they've stepped up patrols throughout this body of water, not only just on the water but also through the air. We've seen several times throughout the day where air patrols have been going up and down this channel of water, just checking out every ship that makes its way. This is a secure zone up here, so essentially if you have no business doing business up here, you're not supposed to be up here. And also the Coast Guard also has a command center, a nerve center if you will, where they use a series of video cameras to monitor each and every ship that makes its way toward Houston through these waters. And they have the ability to not only see each and every person who is on these boats, but also to speak with them directly. So this is a situation that is very intense, and the Coast Guard says that even in the last couple of days, since the orange alert level was kicked into gear, that they have stepped it up an even higher notch.
The Coast Guard is prepared and trained for just about any contingency. We have very professional boarding officers and law enforcement people out on our boats. We have professional pilots in the air that are looking and can pick out things that are anomalies that we need to be concerned about from a security standpoint. So we are as ready as we can be, watching the channel 24 hours a day by boat, helicopter, and electronic surveillance through our vessel traffic service.
Just to give you a sense, what you're seeing there in the distance is the Fred Hartman Bridge, just east of Houston, the city of Houston. I'll show you that because earlier this afternoon, to give an indication of just how much things are being watched very closely here, someone noticed a suspicious package that had been left on top of the bridge. Turned out to be nothing, but that bridge was shut down for several hours today. And several of the things that have changed here in the last couple of weeks, since 9/11, but also has been, the reminder has gone out to all the crews that work this body of water. Every Coast Guard official that goes out on the water must wear a bulletproof vest. And also, since you deal with so much international freight that comes through here, this is the second largest petrochemical port in the world, that all of the international ships that come through this channel have to register with the Coast Guard 96 hours in advance of arriving here. That used to be 24 hours, but that has been changed. And they're able to be inspected and have all of the crew checked out before they make their way inland here in the port of Houston. Aaron, back to you.
Quick as you can. Have they seen anything out there that makes them nervous, or has it been a very routine day?
Very routine day. They say that they have intelligence that comes to them from several sources, but nothing out of the ordinary.
Ed, thanks a lot. Ed Lavendera. Looks like a pretty night, doesn't it, in coming up in Houston today. It is beginning to be nightfall in Houston. It is coming up on daybreak out in the Persian Gulf. Wolf.
And it's actually been a pretty night here in Kuwait City as well. We're expecting a nice day tomorrow. Let's hope it stays like that. Meanwhile, U.S. relations with Turkey took a turn for the better today when Ankara announced it would let U.S. warplanes use its airspace. But we're getting late word tonight the Turkish military is taking actions in defiance of Pentagon war planners. Our sister network, CNN Turk, says about 1,000 Turkish troops have now crossed the border into northern Iraq. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld said today such an incursion could cause big problems.
You can be certain that we have advised the Turkish government and the Turkish armed forces that it would be notably unhelpful if they went into the north in large numbers.
The Turks say they're only trying to establish a buffer zone to help stem the flow of refugees, but the U.S. is afraid fighting will break out between Turkish forces and the Kurds of northern Iraq. That's only one thing that could go wrong. CNN's Miles O'Brien is standing by the CNN Center in Atlanta with perhaps some analysis of other things that could go wrong for the U.S. military. Miles? Unfortunately, Miles O'Brien is not yet ready. We're going to get to Miles shortly. In the meantime, let's go back to Aaron.
Well, thanks a lot. That's what happens when things aren't ready. Just one quick point on that as General Clark was wandering over to the maps, he noted that when the United States was negotiating, and everyone's aware of this complicated negotiation that was going on in Turkey, this whole question of whether Turkish military forces could go into the northern part of Iraq, the Kurdish-controlled part of Iraq, was part of the negotiation, and it's just, as I think the Secretary of Defense said, remarkably unhelpful to have Turkish forces there. But the Turks are also nervous about their own Kurdish population joining up with the Kurds in northern Iraq, and they're trying to keep that ethnic group from causing any problems, and the Turkish decision today didn't help. That's the quick translation of that. Miles O'Brien has made his way over to General Clark over at the board to lay out some of the things that can go wrong. It seems odd, gentlemen, both. We've talked about so many things today that have gone right from the American side, but war is a complicated piece of business.
Complicated indeed, Aaron. And the Turkish question is one of the big questions we're going to be talking about, along with General Wesley Clark here. We're going to take a little tour of the region, if you will. And a good place to begin to talk about things that can go wrong here is to begin in Israel. You'll remember in 1991, the First Persian Gulf War, the Scud firings, which occurred in that little box we told you about earlier in the far western portion of Iraq, lobbed over into Israeli territory. At the time, the Bush administration the coalition was able to keep Israel from engaging in any sort of reprisals. And that was a difficult challenge, wasn't it?
It was a difficult challenge because Israel was hit again and again and again by Scuds. Fortunately, the Scuds did remarkably little damage, and there were no weapons of mass destruction.
And to keep the Israelis out is crucial, because should they become involved, what happens?
Then you really inflame tensions throughout the region, and instead of it becoming a U.S. operation against Iraq, it becomes an Arab operation against Zionists.
All right, and so we're talking about the Scud missile, which is a derivative of the old V-bombs from World War II.
Really
it's a very unsophisticated device, doesn't have sophisticated aiming capabilities. It's just about out of range from that spot right at the Jordanian border. This Scud-B there, we give you some statistics on it. But for reprisals, there are those Patriot missiles we've been telling you about, and the improved versions of those, as well as the Arrow missile designed to go up, intercept it, shoot a bullet with a bullet. Let's continue on and let's talk about the situation in Turkey, because that is more on our mind today given the events as they have unfolded. One of the issues when we've been talking about the access to getting the 4th Infantry into Turkey, some 60,000 troops, was not so much for a second front as it was to keep the Kurds and the Turks separated. This is a long-standing issue there. And as we move into that Kurdish region, we'll kind of point it out. It's disputed territory. This is an ethnic group, the largest ethnic group in the world, that does not have its own country. It would be nice to have somebody standing between the Turks and the Kurds, wouldn't it?
Long-term frictions there, and of course, there's Kurdish nationalism is a 19th century nationalism, and there are strong Kurdish minorities in Turkey, and from Ankara's perspective, it doesn't want to see an independent Kurdistan.
All right, maybe we can move in a little closer. I can show you the actual region we're talking about there. It's the northern part of Iraq. If we can take the next step on the map, we'll show you exactly the area we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is this region. It includes parts of Iran, parts of Iraq, parts of Turkey, and all of that is disputed. The Kurds would like to create a homeland there. It actually extends a little further beyond that. Now, if there were fighting between the Turks and the Turkish elements and the Kurds, that could lead to Turkey perhaps moving into the northern part of Iraq, potentially, correct?
That's correct. And there have already been conversations between the Iranians and the Turks, both of whom have a common enemy in the Kurds, or potential enemy. So there's all kinds of opportunity for geostrategic mischief right here in northern Iraq.
All right, on that somber note, we'll leave it. General Wes Clark, thank you very much. Wolf.
That's right. Very interesting. The whole Kurdish problem, they're spread out not only in Turkey and Iraq, but in Iran as well as in Syria. The Kurds would certainly love to have their own independent state, but that doesn't look like it's in the cards now or anytime soon. CNN's Jane Araf is in northern Iraq right now. She's moved in from Turkey. Jane, how complicated is this situation now that about 1,000 Turkish military forces have actually crossed the line and gone into northern Iraq?
Well, it couldn't get much more complicated, Wolf, given all the historical sensitivities, and it actually follows U.S. warnings to Turkey that they should not envision any unilateral action. But what we should keep in mind is that 1,000 troops is not a huge number by Turkish standards or by standards in the region. Now, we're not quite sure whether those 1,000 troops are just the vanguard of a much larger force. Turkey had originally, as you know, been talking about tens of thousands of troops in northern Iraq, and that's when the alarm bell sounded, when the U.S. stepped in to try to ease tension between Turkey and the Kurds. There are Peshmerga, Kurdish fighters ranged along the Turkish border. We saw 5,000 of them when we were up there a couple of days ago, and they're warning that there could very well be clashes if Turkish forces move in. Wolf?
All right, Jane Araf from northern Iraq. Jane, thanks very much. Aaron, this whole Kurdish problem, I suspect we're going to be hearing a lot more about it. The Kurds are Muslims. They're not Arabs. They're fiercely independent. They don't like the fact that the Turks are moving in. I have to tell you, though, Turkish officials insist if they're moving in strictly for humanitarian purposes, they say, to prevent a flood of refugees moving from Iraq into Turkey. Aaron?
Well, thanks. It's part of the reason why whenever we talk about whatever the post-war Iraq's going to be, it's also complicated and takes so long because you have all sorts of ethnic groups in the north and in the south and here and there, and they all want a piece of whatever the future's going to be. And in the Kurds' case, they want their, their own autonomous piece. This is no doubt of concern tonight at the White House. The degree of concern, as Jane said, you've only got 1,000 troops there. Dana Bash has the duty at the White House tonight. Dana, were they talking about it today?
A little bit, Aaron. They were talking about the situation, no question. But the big question for everybody who was covering the White House today, and certainly inside the White House, is what everybody around the world is asking is Saddam Hussein still alive? Is he still in charge? And the answer at the White House here, Aaron, is they simply do not know. What Ari Fleischer, the White House spokesman, said earlier today is that the CIA has confirmed, to the best of their knowledge, that Saddam Hussein that was his voice on the tape that aired in Iraq last night, but they have no idea when it was taped. They say it very well could be canned. But one thing that they do know here at the White House is, or they think, that the leadership in Iraq is in a state of disarray. Senior officials say that there is very little communication that they can tell between the senior Iraqi leadership and the troops on the ground, and that, according to the president, who spoke to reporters at a meeting with congressional leaders earlier today, is a good sign. And he said that the war at this point is going very well.
We're making progress. We will stay on task until we've achieved our objective, which is to rid Iraq of weapons of mass destruction and free the Iraqi people so they can live in a society that is hopeful and democratic and at peace in this neighborhood.
Now, Aaron, the president also, there you see a picture of him this morning in the Situation Room. It's a pretty rare glimpse into that room. It's a secure room where he has meetings with his War Council, his national security team. That this morning is where they were discussing the fact that, yes, they do feel like the Iraqi leadership, as I said, is in disarray, but they weren't sure. So that is where they decided to go, the final go-ahead for the massive bombing campaign that we saw all day today. The president, for his part, at this point in time, is at Camp David. He is spending the weekend there. He left earlier this afternoon with his wife Laura and his daughter Barbara. He took along with him in the helicopter, a Marine One, his White House Chief of Staff Andy Card, and he is going to spend his whole weekend there. We are told he's going to have a meeting with his entire War Council, his entire national security team, including the Vice President, the National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice, the Defense Secretary. They will all be joining him tomorrow at Camp David. And Aaron, you know, Camp David is a secluded area, but it is certainly not far from what the president needs to do. There you see a file photo from 2001. He has a secure video phone, you see there. So he has all of the tools necessary to lead this war, to be in touch with the people he needs to be in touch with, and he will, we are told, be doing that all weekend long. And I should note that he will be back, we are told, on Monday for an important meeting. He will be talking to senior congressional leaders, key congressional leaders, about the cost of this war. That has been a controversial question. How much does the president, how much does the White House think this war will cost? We are told that he is going to brief senior members of Congress on the bill that he will send up requesting money, and that, we are told, is going to be in the ballpark of $75 billion. Aaron?
Dana, thank you. Dana Bash at the White House, wherever the president is, whether he's on Air Force One or whether he's at Camp David, the White House travels, essentially, the communication system travels with the president, so he's never out of touch. We heard, as Dana was reporting, the sounds of some protesters outside the White House. There have been considerable protests around the world. Wolf, I know some, a good number of them in your part of the world.
That's absolutely true. The U.S.-led strike, Aaron, on Iraq is certainly not being well received, at least in much of the world. Here's a brief look at some of the protests that have been taking place today. About 4,000 Palestinians marched in Gaza, pledging support for Saddam Hussein. 2 Hamas leaders called on Iraqis to use suicide bombings against Americans. In Yemen, at least 3 people were killed in clashes between police and protesters outside the U.S. Embassy. Thousands of people demonstrated in Cairo as well, the Arab world's largest city. Dozens of police officers and protesters were hurt. In Indonesia, the world's most populous Muslim country, crowds threw eggs at the British Embassy and besieged U.S. fast food restaurants and banks. And there were also clashes in Beirut as police tried to keep demonstrators from marching on the U.S. mission there. In Italy, which officially is backing the war, thousands of people marched in Rome. Demonstrations also were held in other major European cities. Aaron?
Some of that looked very, very nasty. We saw Protests in San Francisco today, nasty. Chicago have been protests the last couple of days as well. Here's one going on in Chicago right now, courtesy of our affiliate there, WLS, probably one of our affiliates in Chicago. If we have no control over the camera, obviously, but if they do pull back, we'll get a much better sense of the size of them. It must be, Wolf, to Kuwaitis in particular, somewhat amusing to know, and Kuwaitis have access to CNN, for one thing, to see these protests in the United States, because they are, by and large, they're certainly Kuwaitis for whom this would not apply, but they are by and large very supportive of the U.S. effort to see these protests, which to them are interesting at two levels. One is that there is anti-war activism in the United States, and two, that this sort of political dissent is allowed to go on. You wouldn't see this in the streets of Kuwait at all.
Well, they so strongly support the United States in this war. The people here in Kuwait, as you well know, Aaron, these are people who suffered very directly, very personally at the hands of Saddam Hussein when the Iraqis invaded Kuwait a dozen years ago. They lived through 7 months of occupation until the first Gulf War ended in their liberation. So they're certainly sophisticated. They know what's going on, but they're probably a little bit surprised to see the extent of the demonstrations in the United States.
Excuse me, just as we look at the pictures, Wolf, if you could take them full for us, that would help me too, because I can see them a little bit better. You can see that police have pretty much cordoned off the area. They're clearly trying to keep the protesters from flooding out into the streets, or at least that's the way it appears to me. It's not like the police command center's talking to me, but they do seem to have them a cordon of police to keep them off the streets so the traffic can continue to move in Chicago. As we watch these, and we said this last night, and we'll say it again and probably another time too. There also have been around the country today in various places. We saw one in Mobile, Alabama. Protests probably not the right word. Demonstrations in support of the president's policy, and in many places in support of the troops as well. This is the American democracy. You are allowed to take to the streets to show your displeasure, even in times like this. This is part of what we go through, and as long as it stays peaceful, and there's no sense that what we see going on in Chicago, at least down by the waterfront, I know exactly where that is, actually. There is no sense that it is anything but peaceful. These are live pictures coming from Chicago. Wolf.
You know, it's interesting, Aaron. You see the police officers holding back the demonstrators in Chicago. It's hard to tell how many are there, and certainly but a tiny fraction of the population of Chicago showing up to protest against this war. But it does remind me a little bit, those of our viewers old enough to remember a little bit of Chicago police and demonstrators in 1968 protesting the Vietnam War during that Democratic convention in Chicago. This is certainly a lot more peaceful, certainly a lot smaller, but it does bring back some memories. The Chicago demonstrations then, an earlier war, now obviously a very different war unfolding right now.
I was literally a young reporter in 1968, had just in Chicago, was not yet 20 years old, and was getting paid $10 a story, a radio story, to cover the protests in Lincoln Park in Chicago during the Democratic Convention, that horrible week in Chicago. We are in very different times. I think all of us as a country in many ways have come to understand some differences about policy and the military, that we don't blame soldiers, for one thing, for what's going on if we're against policy. In any case, the last couple of nights there have been these demonstrations in Chicago. The largest demonstrations actually that we are aware of that have gone on in the United States have gone on out west. In San Francisco, yesterday in San Francisco, as you continue to watch these live pictures down by the waterfront of Chicago, yesterday in San Francisco, more than 1,000 people were arrested. There was another large demonstration there today. It was yesterday's I don't think as many people today were arrested, but yesterday it was the largest number of arrests in almost a generation in the city of San Francisco. Protests aren't foreign to the folks in San Francisco, and there's been a lot of anti-war feeling building there for a long time. Chicago is a more complicated place, politically complicated place. It's a Democratic city, but it's very much a blue-collar Democratic city, and one would suspect, just as you're going to make a point, you'll lose the live signal. It happens almost every time in life. One would suspect that there is much greater division of feeling in a city like Chicago than there might be out west in San Francisco. In any case, around the country, there are protests against the war, and there are protests or there are demonstrations in support of the troops and in support of the president's policy. And as you look at these pictures of Baghdad right now, these are live pictures of Baghdad. We mentioned this at the beginning, that our crew, Nick Robertson, who's, you don't mind if I boast here for a second, whose stellar work over the first couple of days of this, that Nick and his team were politely asked to leave the country, or perhaps not so politely. Now, it is very difficult to get out of there. It's a long drive. Essentially, the way out of Baghdad right now, the only way out is to get out by vehicle, and you have to make your way to Jordan, to the border in Jordan. And ordinarily, under any circumstance, that's a long and aggravating and difficult drive. It is made more complicated and will confess more worrisome to us because there's an enormous amount of military activity going on. And believe me, there's not a lot of traffic right now on the road from Baghdad to Amman, Jordan. And we just know that our guys, Nick and his team, are trying to make their way out. And that has impacted a bit on our ability to report the story, but fortunately we've been able to connect with all sorts of people who have been allowed to stay in to give us the word picture to complement the extraordinary look that our cameras have provided when those cruise missiles started to rain down about 9 o'clock in Baghdad earlier today, Wolf.
And you know, I just want to reassure our viewers out there, so many of whom have got to know our correspondents in Baghdad over these many, many months, Nick Robertson, of course, and Reem Brahimi. They are fine. They're moving out. They're trying to get out of Iraq. They've been ordered out together with our producer there, our senior executive producer, Ingrid Fromanek, as well as our photographer, Brian Pucati. All of them very, very courageous journalists. And you know, Aaron, that Nick Robertson was working for CNN 12 years ago. He was in Baghdad on that first night of the air war as well, stayed on, and Ingrid, of course, was there as well. So these are experienced journalists. A pity that the Iraqi government has decided to kick them out right now. So they'll make their way out of the country and do some reporting elsewhere for us, but they've obviously done an outstanding job, and not only us, but all of our viewers, I'm sure, are grateful to them for their hard work.
Well, if I was their boss, I'd give them at least one day off before we send them somewhere to be doing other reporting. It's just past 4 o'clock, 4:03 now in Baghdad, makes it 8:03 here in the east. A new hour begins there and here. During this hour, we'll take a look at some of the questions that are being asked around the world. Perhaps question A1 on A day, is that man alive or not? And if he is alive, is he in control of his country? Are all of his lieutenants, is his government still alive and in place and functioning? Perhaps there is no more critical question tonight to the American side, to the American military planners, civilian and military, as to whether the Saddam Hussein government is still intact and in control. In parts of Iraq liberated by U.S. ground forces today, they were tearing down pictures of Saddam Hussein, American soldiers, and getting some help from locals. I suppose if you see the Americans come in and the forces they've come in, you want to look friendly to them, no matter what you might feel. If you got half a brain and they were warmly greeted, and in that part of Iraq there's no reason to suspect they were anything but friendly. 8,000-man Iraqi Army Division has surrendered tonight in mass, and we're trying to figure out precisely who they are and how that surrender went down, who they were talking to. Did the commander surrender for them? All of that. Tonight, the city of Baghdad has been paying the price in the most fearsome sort of way for the defiance of Saddam Hussein.
وهي صواريخ تنطلق من
الرسمية الذي اختاره المخططون.
سيستمر بهذه الوتيرة.
نعم مستمر.
وهو انفجار آخر.
صوت صاروخ.
هذا انفجار آخر، أصوات آخر نشرنا قبل بداية الغارة أو بعد بداية.
Al Jazeera correspondent who was broadcasting at the time. These are pictures from Al Jazeera. They have a number of locations. Al Jazeera is, I think most of you know by now, some of you may not, is the Arab language news channel broadcast throughout the Arab world. Source of some controversy, but they were courageous today in staying on the air and broadcasting during this. What General Wes Clark is with me. General Clark, that's got to be 7 minutes of pure hell if you're anywhere near.
Those are big bombs, and even if you're not that near, you're going to feel it. You're going to feel the shock effect, and you're going to get the sense of being powerless. And that is, in fact, what it's designed to demonstrate. The aircraft that dropped those bombs flew over Baghdad with impunity. The anti-aircraft fire didn't touch them. The missiles didn't touch them. It's just sheer power.
So we've had no reports that any of the American aircraft were hit by the anti-aircraft fire, though it certainly was going up out there. Are you surprised at all by the way the Iraqis defended or failed to defend their capital?
Well, it sounded like in the first pass that the defense was kind of disorganized and scattered, but as I heard some of the Navy pilots talk, they did mention some surface-to-air missiles that had been fired up and so forth. So we may not be getting the complete picture of it on this television view.
On the subject of the complete picture, do military planners now at Central Command, Tommy Franks, General Franks and his team, now know what they've hit and what they've taken out?
They're just now finding out. They're not quite certain yet. It may take up to, you get an initial sort of a hot wash BDA from the battle damage assessment.
Thank you.
From the missiles that you can see going in on the targets. Now, in the case of these JDAMs, you would not, they don't have a television in them. So when they go in, they just go in and you don't know. So you're going to have to go back and make another pass with some other asset to determine whether you've actually hit the target and what the impact is.
Well, you're throwing a lot of jargon in.
I'm going to be
a lot of
careful of
jargon.
that.
We got assets and BDAs going. Is that done by satellite? Well, as daybreak comes, will satellite show them that, or do they have to fly over? And how do they find out what they've destroyed and what they haven't?
Well, it's going to be done by satellite.
Okay.
And the satellite makes a pass, and they know in advance when the pass is going to be, and they've got the satellite targeted to look at it.
Every now and then you do that just to remind me you were a general.
I keep trying to, it's hard to slip roles, and you try not to say certain things.
General Clark, thank you. Wolf Blitzer is with us again this hour. He's over in Kuwait. Wolf?
Thanks very much, Aaron. Iraqi television keeps on showing the world pictures of President Saddam Hussein, but nobody seems to know when those pictures were taken. No one seems to know if Saddam Hussein is alive or dead, in control, or what's going on. Our national security correspondent, David Ensor, has been trying to figure all of that out. He's got excellent sources in Washington. He's joining us now live. David?
Well, Wolf, as you say, Iraqi television showed pictures of President Saddam Hussein again today, but again, the same question as before. Are these pictures new, or were they taken days and days ago? This time, Iraqi television showed Saddam Hussein with his son Qusay, saying he remains firmly in control. But U.S. officials said the pictures could just as easily be old. Such meetings are a staple of Iraqi TV. U.S. intelligence officials say Saddam could be injured or even dead. Whether or not he's alive, Bush administration officials say his grip on power is slipping.
The regime is starting to lose control of their country. The confusion of Iraqi officials is growing. Their ability to see what is happening on the battlefield, to communicate with their forces, and to control their country is slipping away.
Mr. Secretary, do you believe Saddam Hussein is currently in control of Iraq?
I don't know.
Sources say since the strikes Thursday morning against Saddam Hussein's compound, intelligence headquarters, and a Republican Guard facility, there has been a marked drop in Iraqi leadership communications monitored by U.S. intelligence. Saddam Hussein, a knowledgeable official says, is not communicating orders and can no longer trust anybody. Even deciding where and whether to sleep at night, he said, is a fateful choice for the Iraqi leader. As for the tape released hours after the attack on his compound, in which Saddam mentions the date of the attack, it is Saddam, the White House says. The question is, when?
The tape has been analyzed by the Central Intelligence Agency, and their analysis has led them to believe that the tape is indeed the voice of Saddam Hussein, but no conclusions have been reached about whether it was canned ahead of time or not.
A senior intelligence official tells me he believes Saddam Hussein was in the compound early Thursday morning, along with at least one of his sons, when the U.S. dropped tons of munitions on it. But the official says the U.S. at this point simply does not know whether Saddam survived, and if so, whether he's been injured. Welcome, this official said, to the fog of war. Wolf?
David, the analysis by the CIA that that videotape was in fact Saddam Hussein, even though they don't know when that videotape was made. There had been so much speculation about body doubles, how many people impersonating Saddam Hussein may have been, but the key was the voice, the Arabic, the inflections, the voice that the CIA studied more than any pictures, I take it. Is that right?
Well, that's right. The quality of the picture wasn't all that good, Wolf, but the voice was very clear, and they compared it. They have pretty good techniques over at the National Security Agency for comparing voice tapes with each other, and they're pretty well satisfied that, yes, it was Saddam Hussein on that tape, but the key question is, when was the tape made? Some people believe that Saddam might have recorded a series of similar messages, including this one that said that, we were attacked on March 20th, so that they could be released subsequently in case he was injured or killed. So there's just an air of mystery about this still, Wolf.
And there was that story, you saw it, I'm sure, in the Washington Post, the CIA supposedly getting in touch with a former mistress of Saddam Hussein who now lives in exile. She thought that wasn't Saddam Hussein, but clearly the CIA thinks she was wrong. David Ensor, our national security correspondent, thanks very much. David, you want to make a point?
Well, just to tell you that the CIA actually wasn't very happy about that. They say they were never in touch with the mistress, and possibly the Pentagon was, but they weren't. And they don't believe, I guess, that she's a particularly credible source. Wolf.
All right. David Ensor, thanks very much. She obviously wasn't very credible this time since she got it wrong. Aaron?
One more reason in life not to take mistresses, Wolf, in my view. Thank you. Just, I know I'm about to throw our control room into a fit here. General Clark, David talked for a second about there hasn't been much communication from Saddam and the normal frequencies, and you made a point to me earlier about why that might be.
Well, it would be normal. It would be a routine procedure for a man like Saddam, who knows he's going to be attacked, to have set up a separate emergency channel of communication, pay the Chinese fiber optic guys to come in, never use it, never disclose it until you absolutely have to. This is probably not what's happening, but it is a possibility, and hopefully we're considering that possibility.
Right, and I think that's really the point of this, and we'll move on from it, is that sometimes things just aren't quite as, the fact that we report something, it's not quite as simple as it might be. They have contingencies just like the United States has contingencies in communications, and that might be what it is, and that's the only point we're trying to make, though well, we make the point. Jamie McIntyre's over at the Pentagon. I know Jamie has a point to make, and he always makes it a whole lot cleaner than I just did. Jamie?
I don't know about that, Aaron. It's been pretty confusing these days. One thing we're sorting out, though, is a key to the U.S. military strategy is getting the Iraqi military to surrender. And up to this point, we've only seen relatively small numbers of Iraqi troops surrendering, but we got word tonight that the 51st Iraqi Mechanized Division, this is a division that was down along the border with Kuwait, one of the first lines of defense, has in fact surrendered essentially en masse, although it's not clear exactly how many troops have turned themselves over to the U.S. military and how many are just has simply disappeared. But the commander of the unit, the division commander and his deputy both formally surrendered to U.S. forces in the south, and some number of the division as well. So that's what the U.S. was hoping would happen with all of the Iraqi divisions, but at this point, this is the first significant one. Now, we also have word that in the north, there are Iraqi troops who want to surrender, but there are no American troops there to surrender to. But they have already expressed desire to surrender when U.S. forces come in. It's a little different political situation up there in the north. But again, too soon to say whether or not this is going to be the way it's going to play out, or whether as U.S. troops get closer to Baghdad and they meet up with the Republican Guard, whether they'll actually meet stiff resistance there.
And just to put a point on that, in the way the Iraqis have set their defense up, Jamie, their best troops are not the troops closest to the border with Kuwait, are they?
No, those, in fact, some of the least well-equipped and least well-trained and the lowest morale troops are right along the south there. Essentially, Saddam Hussein's defensive strategy was to give up on the borders and to try to draw a tight ring around Baghdad and put a last stand there. The big question is, will his troops follow orders once they see that essentially a U.S. military victory is inevitable?
Anyway, they've got some number, and perhaps it's 8,000, and they have to care for them once they get them in control. I thought I saw a report, well, I know I saw it, I'm not precisely sure where I saw it, that in some cases there had been some surrendering of troops, and basically what happened is the United States forces, or the British forces, Jamie, took their weapons and sent them home, not unlike that which happened in Afghanistan with some of the Taliban fighters. Is that your understanding also?
My understanding is whenever they think they can do that, whenever they think it's not a big threat, they will essentially take the weapons and send them back to their barracks or send them to some neutral place so they can proceed without them. If they think they're a threat, they will take them into custody. We do have reports of some prisoners actually being held in holding areas, some of them actually being handcuffed with those plastic handcuffs. But to the extent that they think the Iraqi troops aren't a threat, they're going to try to treat them as victims rather than the vanquished.
And that, Jamie, thank you. That has advantages for the coalition forces, because those are people then that don't have to be controlled and cared for and fed and worried about. You just send them on their way, and they're no longer a problem. But the numbers there are small to this point, Wolf.
Very, very small, but who knows what's going to happen down the road. Let's move on and talk about the coalition. They're moving U.S. and British forces specifically north into Iraq, securing oil fields in the south as they go. Several wells are still burning, but that's a far cry from the more than 24 wells coalition commanders had worried were shooting flames and black smoke into the sky. It's not clear if the fires were deliberately set or an accident. Some of those oil field fires are even visible in Kuwait. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff says all the fields in southern Iraq should soon be secure. We have a report now from CNN's Martin Savage on what's happening in southern Iraq.
The onset of darkness here in southern Iraq brings about a new kind of nightlight that is distinctive by its orange glow. Oil fires burning. We've seen a number of them. These are not oil wells that are on fire, but instead what appear to be oil pipelines that have been damaged or destroyed in some way, shape, or form. Keep in mind, this whole region down here is so rich with oil processing that the oil pipelines literally crisscross around like a spider's web. It's unclear whether these pipelines were damaged intentionally, or maybe it was just part of the aftermath of the bombing campaign and the fighting that took place here, especially yesterday. The fires, for the most part, are billowing and burning out of control. They're not a major environmental or economic impact. They are simply part of the background here. For the Marines that are taking control of the oil fields in the southern part of Iraq, their primary concern is making sure that the oil facilities are under control, that there are no enemy forces as they view Iraqi soldiers here in the region, and that dealing with those oil fires is secondary on their list. We are told that oil firefighting experts are being brought in, and those that are experts in the oil industry in general will be coming into this region to help supervise the revival of Iraq's oil industry. Martin Savage, CNN, with the Marines in southern Iraq.
And British troops are taking up key positions to help protect those critical oil installations as the coalition forces move towards Basra in southern Iraq. The normally stoic British commanders have to be feeling pleased with their progress today. Let's bring back CNN's Miles O'Brien and the former NATO Supreme Commander General Wesley Clark for a bit of perspective. We learned today, Miles, very important that the basic game plan was changed. The ground war started effectively first specifically to protect those oil fields in southern Iraq, the air war starting thereafter.
Well, and there's good reason for it, Wolf. If you recall, during the first Gulf War, there were some 700 oil well fires, mostly in the South, and it took several years and some $5 billion just to get that oil-producing capability back in good working order. And so there's good reason to keep it preserved, because ultimately when you start talking about rebuilding Iraq, that oil revenue is a key part of the picture. General Wes Clark is here to tell us about what really is shaping up to be a textbook maneuver here in the South, involving British Marines in conjunction with U.S. forces there to seize and get the hold of a key pumping facility in this port right near Basra. Why don't you lay it out for us, and we'll get a sense of the lay of the land in just a moment as we're talking.
Well, Miles, the objective of this was to, if I can use this pointer a little bit on this map, the objective right down here is this is the point at which all of Iraq's oil exports to the south go out into the Persian Gulf. So there's a pumping station, there's a couple of platforms offshore, and this is a strategic asset for Iraq, and if it were destroyed, it would be an environmental disaster for the Persian Gulf. And so the coalition forces elected to take it. And it's a classic air, ground, sea operation. Special operating forces go in. We knew what the coalition forces understood what the enemy position was. They had excellent intelligence on the air defense sites, a Chinese surface-to-surface missile site in the area. They used B-52s, firing, dropping JDAMs. They brought in AC-130 gunships. They came in by heliborne assault. They came in from the sea. They took the oil platforms. They went into the assault themselves. This force of probably several hundred Marine commandos and special operations forces ended up opposed by about 1,300 Iraqis. It took several hours to complete the action. No friendly casualties, several dozen Iraqi killed and wounded, and ultimately the surrender of the facilities, mission completely accomplished, and the Iraqi force surrendered as well.
While you were talking, we've zoomed in, courtesy of earthviewer.com and Digital Globe. This is that facility you were talking about right there. The Iraqis don't have a great deep water port down there, and that's part of the problem. They come in from the Shatt al-Arab waterway, and they're able to do that offloading there, and that gives you a sense of what's going on there. Let's talk about what the United Kingdom and the U.S. forces were using in the way of tools and all this. First of all, U.S. A-10 Warthog aircraft, which is close air support, used a lot for armor, but also in these cases as well.
That's right. Well, it really starts with U.S. intelligence, which has the overhead imagery and so can see the battle. And then U.S. command and control to bring the air assets, ground assets, naval assets together. Then the A-10s.
Yeah.
Then we had the
AC-130
gunship on.
We've heard about that.
That's exactly right.
What's its role?
Well, it's orbiting around the area. It's got continuous visibility over the ground. Got a 105 millimeter cannon, 40 millimeter guns, 25 millimeter gun. Very heavy firepower. Great ability to control and dominate an area. So they can actually see individual people walking on the ground at night, and if they're hostile, they'll take them under fire and engage them. It's a very effective platform.
I don't know if you can see right here what it has. It has weaponry out the left side. It makes left turns in those orbits and is capable of laying down a tremendous amount of fire. Also, the H-64 Apache helicopter, attack helicopter, was put to bear on this textbook case, as you say. And we talked about this the other night. This it has all kinds of missiles and rockets that it can fire out. Why don't you tell us what we're looking at right now?
We're looking at right here. This is the full array. It's a 30 millimeter chain gun. It's got a chin bubble there that's got the night vision and thermal optics on it. You see Hellfire missiles. It's got also unguided aerial rockets. But you can vary the mix of ordnance depending on what the mission is.
All right. And we were told there was a mass surrender there of many of the Iraqi forces at this. What does that tell you about their morale and their commitment to this regime?
Well, they were overwhelmed, basically. They could not stand up to the combination of firepower and skilled on-the-ground forces. Not committed, not effective defense of that area. They lost.
Do you have the nagging sense some of this is seeming too good to be true so far, the way it has gone militarily?
Well, I think this is on track, is the way I'd put it. This is what we would expect. We know these aren't top quality forces. We expect to be able to do these operations. It's not easy to do them. This is an extremely complicated operation that was pulled off here, but it was pulled off well and it accomplished the purpose. But don't be complacent. There's a long way to go.
All right, General Wes Clark, thank you very much. Aaron.
Thank you very much. A lot of those soldiers almost certainly were conscripts, were drafted. And we saw, as Jamie McIntyre mentioned, many of them, at least in those pictures, we saw handcuffed with those plastic band handcuffs. Contrast that with the pictures, rather, of the way the American forces were greeted today by people in southern Iraq. A lot of pictures from cities around the world here, and not all of it favorable to the American position, to be sure. Anti-war demonstrators in Cairo pelting police. This was a nasty affair in Cairo today. The police used tear gas and water cannons. Often the target here is the U.S. Embassy. The protest organizers and police say drew about 10,000 people, many of whom chanting the now familiar "Death to America" slogan and promising to burn the American embassy to the ground. Similar protests from other countries in the Arab world. Yemen, things got so bad, police fired live ammunition on the crowd. Again, always with a tight shot like that, it's hard to tell how many people are there, but that is a very nasty affair there going on in Yemen today. American officials very concerned about this sort of thing in the Arab world, that an invasion of Iraq could destabilize many of these governments. Government officials say 2 demonstrators were killed. A police officer was also killed. 7 other officers also wounded. That was in Yemen. The next pictures come from Mexico. The war unpopular there. American flag we see burned. That's days like this, that's not easy to look at, but that's what happened in Mexico south of the border. That scene unfolded yesterday, we should tell you, in Mexico City. We ought not necessarily assume that that's how most Mexican citizens feel. We don't know that, but many of them came out into the streets yesterday to protest their anger at the American policy. In the United States, we do this sort of thing in a somewhat different way. Even in moments like this, we exercise our free speech rights, and they're doing it tonight in Chicago. I know that this sort of thing angers a good many of you, that you see it all as inappropriate in times like this, and that's understandable, but this is also, in our view, if you don't mind, the beauty of the country and the vibrance of the American democracy, that we are strong enough in these moments with our soldiers abroad and fighting, that we can countenance this sort of protest to government action. It is a great American strength, even as it might be maddening to some. This is the second night in a row of demonstrations in Chicago. Yesterday, more than 500 people were arrested that clogged Lakeshore Drive down by Lake Michigan there. And this is going on now, courtesy of pictures courtesy of CNN affiliate WLS, good television station in Chicago, Illinois. In Maryland, about 30 anti-war protesters were arrested when they were trespassing on the federal courthouse in Baltimore, as they say. About 40 demonstrators staged a mock funeral procession at the University of Maryland campus. There were demonstrations in Washington that led to more than 24 arrests. People lying in the streets, civil disobedience, peaceful protests, but you can't lie in the middle of the street and not expect the police to come and take you away. One person is still in jail for refusing to identify himself, which is a crime. That's, again, these protests don't measure necessarily the middle. Protests or demonstrations measure one end of the spectrum or another. A snapshot now, though, of public opinion. The administration says things are looking good so far, and the country is certainly backing the president. The president's approval rating is at 67%, according to the latest ABC News Washington Post poll. Bill Schneider is next to me. That's up, I guess, 7 or 8 points from the last time I looked at it. CBS News has, the CBS News New York Times, credit to both, has the president's approval rating at about 62%. I'll confess, Decapitation 101 was not a course I took in my brief college career. I gather we're going to talk about every now and then, folks. I gather Bill Schneider's here. We're going to talk a bit about how the country views the Saddam Hussein question, I gather.
You gather correctly.
I'm not so bad sometimes.
That's right. We do say that our goal is decapitation of the Iraqi regime, not, interestingly, assassination. And there's a reason. During the Cold War, the CIA did get involved in efforts to assassinate other countries' leaders, like Ngo Dinh Diem in Vietnam, Patrice Lumumba in the Congo, and there were even plans to poison Fidel Castro's cigars. When the news got out, Congress investigated, and they almost passed a law banning assassinations. But then President Gerald Ford issued an executive order heading that law off. The order in 1976 said, quote, "No person employed by or acting on behalf of the United States government shall engage in or conspire to engage in assassination." Now, the fact that it was an executive order, not an act of Congress, is important because it means the president controls the policy and the president can change it. And in fact, just after September 11th, Secretary of State Colin Powell said the Bush administration was considering rescinding that executive order.
Are there laws that need to be changed or new laws brought into effect to give us more ability to deal with this kind of threat? So everything is under review.
But they did not need to change the law because it allows targeting an enemy combatant if the United States is engaged in an armed conflict. A terrorist like Osama bin Laden is an enemy combatant because he masterminded an attack on the United States. So is Saddam Hussein because he's the commander-in-chief of the Iraqi armed forces. Targeting an enemy combatant is not an act of assassination. It's an act, legally, it's an act of war.
Yes, in fact, a week or so back, Ari Fleischer, the president's spokesman, was asked specifically that question, would the United States forces try and kill, that's a good, clean word everybody understands, kill Saddam Hussein. And he said, once war starts, fair game.
That's right. And even if this isn't an officially declared war, some people say Congress didn't declare war, the UN didn't sanction war, it's an illegal war. I spoke to several international law scholars from all over the world today, and they all said it doesn't matter. The law of armed conflict says in any armed conflict, you can target any enemy combatant.
And that answers the question. I know I've gotten a bunch of emails on this question from people who are strongly opposed to the war. It's not a question of under American policy, it is a question of under international law, the rules of war, which is always, I think, one of those more amusing phrases in the vocabulary. It's perfectly legitimate tactic.
That's right, yeah. And there are those who say that maybe Bush could be charged with a war crime if there's an assassination. But there you have a question. Where would he be charged? The United States does not recognize the International Criminal Court. There have been a few cases, Aaron, recently of domestic courts in other countries claiming the right to indict leaders of different countries for violating international law. We all remember the case of General Pinochet. But as long as Bush remains president, he's immune from prosecution. After he leaves office, however, some court somewhere might try to indict him for an unlawful assassination. So I think he may need to be a little careful where he travels.
Well, we'll find out.
Okay.
Thank you, Bill Schneider.
Sure.
That's Decapitation 101 for those of you who, like me, didn't take the class. Quickly look ahead at the next half hour. What are the rules for handling prisoners of war? We're talking about international law. The Geneva Convention comes into play here and is in play now in the region. Coalition forces prepared for that responsibility, and it is a responsibility. We'll also give you another look for those of you who just joining us now at how it looked and sounded in Baghdad today. 9 o'clock, we remind you, Larry King Live will be talking to embedded journalists across Iraq for the latest on the war as the sun comes up on Saturday morning in the Persian Gulf. And of course, at 10 o'clock, you know I would do this, at 10 o'clock, News Night, and we'll have 4 hours of News Night for you at 10 o'clock. That's a quick look at what's coming up ahead. Here's Heidi Collins with a quick look at what has already gone on today.
Thanks, Aaron. Here is the very latest. Now, Baghdad pounded by massive Allied airstrikes. U.S. officials say it is the start of an intensive campaign to instill shock and awe in the Iraqi leadership. Other Iraqi cities were also hit and hit hard. Of the many targets in Baghdad, one was the huge Republican Palace complex containing key command and control facilities. Earlier today, Iraqi television broadcast these pictures of what it says is bomb damage to a building in Baghdad. Iraqi officials say the building is the Peace Palace, which they say was used for visiting dignitaries. They also say a museum they call the Flowers Palace was hit in the bombing. President Bush says coalition forces are making progress. You see the evidence of that on this map. Right now, Allied forces control the southern Faw Peninsula and major oil facilities there, the port city of Qasr and 2 key airfields in western Iraq. And nothing so far is slowing down Allied ground troops as they continue their advance on Baghdad. At this hour, Iraq still insists Saddam Hussein is alive. Iraqi television today broadcast pictures of what it said was the Iraqi leader meeting with his son Qusay. But it is not clear when the pictures were taken or whether they are authentic. U.S. officials believe he was in a building that was bombed early Thursday, but they don't know whether he was killed or even wounded. Allied officials say Iraqi troops continue to surrender. The Pentagon says the Iraq's 51st Division gave up to U.S. troops today. The division likely has as many as 10,000 troops. The Pentagon calls it the most significant surrender to date. Iraqis in the southern town of Safwan, just across the Kuwaiti border, seem to be overjoyed by the arrival of American Marines. Thousands of demonstrators in Chicago are protesting the corporate involvement with the war in Iraq. They marched past the high-rise home of the man behind the Army's Army of One marketing campaign. They also marched past Boeing's corporate headquarters. Boeing is a major defense contractor. Those are the stories making headlines at this hour. Now back to Wolf in Kuwait.
Thanks very much, Heidi. It's still several hours before daybreak in Baghdad. Actually, not that long. We just heard the call for morning prayers here in Kuwait City. The light of the day, though, will bring into focus the devastating results of the massive aerial attack on Iraq. Without much let-up today, U.S. forces began to unleash the so-called promised shock and awe bombing campaign in punishing doses to try to soften up the enemy. Let's give you a better summary of that airstrike and the results of what that military dubbed A-Day. Aaron, this has been an incredible day by all accounts, and it may just be the beginning.
Well, it's certainly not the end. The Pentagon has made it pretty clear that what we saw today will be followed up as they assess. General Clark was talking a short time ago about the need to assess now the damage that was done, and that'll become easier. That's the call to prayers in Baghdad this morning, Saturday morning. That call to prayer going on in all Islamic countries. It's time. Is a far more secular country than many in the region. Wolf, I'm sure you can hear what must be a similar call to prayer now going on in Kuwait City, about 400 miles from Baghdad right now. This morning, it's Saturday morning now. The holiday, the holy day has ended. It's just, Wolf, just as I'm looking at this, and you can't help but wonder now, people getting up, dawn coming now, about a half hour, 45 minutes from now, what the people there are wondering what their day is going to bring. We all wake up and sort of know what our day is going to be. We're going to get up and have some breakfast and go off to work and go about our lives. If you're one of the 5 million residents in Baghdad, Iraq today, and you wake up, you must wonder what the day is going to be, and I suppose, Wolf, what the night is going to be like.
Well, certainly in Baghdad, this will be the opportunity. It will be an opportunity for people to go out and see the destruction, the damage that those Tomahawk cruise missiles, those 2,000-pound bombs caused in Baghdad and around the Iraqi capital. I have to tell you, a few minutes ago, when we heard the call to prayer here in Kuwait City, similar to almost exactly to what people are hearing in Baghdad, for a brief split second, once again I thought, uh-oh, here go those sirens. The sirens beginning to go off in Kuwait City. We just get a little jittery when we hear that. After a few seconds, though, you could hear the Qadi beginning the call to prayers of for the Muslim, for the faithful in this part of the world. It's been an incredible day, a devastating day by all accounts. CNN's Miles O'Brien now has a look back at this awesome day.
Recapping the last few hours in the war in Iraq. 12:05 p.m. Eastern Time, just after sundown in Baghdad, air raid sirens go off, followed by anti-aircraft fire in the skies over the Iraqi capital. 12:15 p.m., CNN's Dr. Sanjay Gupta reports on the second and third combat casualty of this strike in Iraq. 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. in Baghdad. The full force of the coalition shock and awe campaign is felt on a day the Pentagon is calling A Day for air assault. 5:10 p.m. State Department correspondent Andrea Koppel reports senior members of the Iraqi Republican Guard are, according to sources, holding surrender negotiations with CIA and Pentagon officials. 5:39 p.m. Iraq's UN ambassador rails against the U.S. and Britain and criticizes UN Secretary General Kofi Annan for not preventing the attack. 7 p.m. Eastern, Pentagon officials report that Iraq's 51st Division, up to 10,000 Army troops, have surrendered to U.S. forces. Miles O'Brien, CNN.
Let's go up to northern Iraq once again. CNN's Jana Roth is standing by. There's word that Turkish forces have crossed the line, gone from Turkey into northern Iraq. Jane?
Wolf reports that about 1,000 troops or more may have crossed. Now, it may be a numbers game at this point. The U.S. says that it would not approve of large numbers of Turkish forces coming through. 1,000 is not a large number, but there are indications that there may be many more to follow. And as you know, this may be a huge problem in the making. Kurdish officials have warned that there could be clashes between Kurdish forces that they have deployed along the Turkish border and those Turkish troops. Now, according to Turkey, the troops are here to prevent a humanitarian crisis, waves of refugees. The Kurds just don't believe it. Wolf?
Jane, now you've spent a lot of time in Iraq. You were our Baghdad bureau chief. You spent a lot of time in Turkey over these many months gearing up for what is unfolding right now. How do they resolve this issue? How do the Kurds convince the Turks that they are not going to seek some sort of independence, that Iraq will remain unified, a single state?
Well, they've been trying to do it essentially through the Americans, and the Americans have been trying to reassure both sides, reassure the Turks that the Kurds are not a threat to them, that they will make sure that Kirkuk and the oil city of Kirkuk remains under American control and then is handed over to a unified Iraq. They're trying to reassure the Kurds that Turkish troops will not be a threat to them, but there's very deep suspicion, obviously historical suspicion, on both sides. Now, the Kurds believe that Turkey is really just intent on making sure that they don't gain any more autonomy, and has even been trying to suppress the autonomy they do have. So there's not very much trust that can be laid here. It just seems to be a matter now of making sure that these troops that are coming in, the Turkish troops, aren't the spark that ignites yet another war, another conflict within the conflict that's already going on. Wolf?
We know over the years there have been these Kurdish terrorist groups that have plagued, that have attacked Turkish government positions. How significant of a factor is that in Turkey today?
It's still really quite embedded in the Turkish consciousness, no matter how many times European countries, for instance, try to tell Turkey that the Kurds here are not a threat to them. Kurdish independence is not a threat. There won't be any independence, but Kurdish autonomy. And despite the fact that the terrorist group, as Turkey sees it, the PKK, which it fought a long-running battle against with tens of thousands of people dead, has essentially been wiped out, it's still very much up front in the Turkish military mind, certainly, and it's something they're afraid of. They say that part of the problem over the last 10 years has been that after the Gulf War, when there was a vacuum with Iraqi forces withdrawing, Turkish separatists, extremist separatists, armed ones, crossed the border. That's what they're trying to prevent this time. Now, the Kurds argue it's not going to be a problem. They're in control this time. They can handle things, and if they can't handle things, the Americans certainly can. Wolf?
All right, Jana Roth reporting from northern Iraq on this complicated Turkish issue. Aaron, it gets about as complicated as when you're dealing with the nexus of Turkey and the Kurds, the Iraqis, the Iranians, and the other ethnic groups there, whether the Shia, the Turkmens. It's pretty much of an ethnic mess, I would say that.
Well, it's a sort of Yugoslavia of the Arab world. It's a very complicated mess, and well, mess maybe is not the best word, but it's why there's so much concern about what happens after a war. The war part was always thought of as, while it's the deadly part, in some respects the easy part. Let's try this. This is a problem for the American military. It is also a problem for the State Department. This question of the Turkish troops crossing into northern Iraq. This was very much part of the negotiation of trying to draw the Turks into the coalition, a negotiation that dominated the news for such a long time. Andrea Koppel spent a good deal of time reporting on that over the weeks, and she's at the State Department where she does her best work and joins us now. They obviously haven't persuaded Turkey not to send its troops in, though they tried very hard, didn't they?
Well, Aaron, there is quite a bit of confusion here at the State Department. In fact, this has been a day full of confusion when it comes to the United States and Turkey. State Department officials tell me that they have no evidence that Turkish troops have crossed into northern Iraq. In fact, one official told me, he said, this is still being negotiated right now. They have been on the phone. Secretary Powell had spoken with a number of officials in recent days, senior Turkish officials, and they are really trying to work this out. Secretary Powell, in fact, told reporters earlier today that he had been in discussions with senior Turkish officials, and there had been no resolution as yet.
At the moment, we don't see a need for any Turkish incursions into northern Iraq, and we are talking with the Turkish authorities to see whether or not there is some planning we should do with respect to any humanitarian needs that might arise along the border.
Now, of course, the confusion is that the Turkish government has signaled that, in fact, Turkish troops are moving south into northern Iraq. They say for humanitarian reasons, as we heard Jana Roth lay out there. The U.S. obviously very concerned that if those troops move in there, the Peshmerga in Kurdistan, in northern Iraq, might take some kind of action against them. And the U.S., that's why they wanted the overflight rights over Turkey, so that they could move U.S. troops into northern Iraq and be sort of a physical buffer there, both preventing a humanitarian crisis or at least being able to tend to it, and also being able to maintain the territorial integrity of Iraq, making sure that there isn't any kind of autonomy in northern Iraq, making sure that Iran doesn't get a slice, that Syria doesn't get a slice, and that Turkey doesn't get a slice. But as you pointed out, Aaron, this matter is still unresolved, and it is a really hot-button issue here today.
Just let this graphic play out here for a second to give you a sense of the Turkish role in all of this. A Muslim country, democracy, member of NATO, ally of the United States, certainly, and this long and complicated, and I'm sure for many Americans, very frustrating negotiation that went on, where billions of dollars in cash and loan guarantees were dangled in front of the Turkish parliament, which is, as you know, originally rejected it all and then has backtracked some. In any case, a large percentage of the Turkish population feels strongly in strong opposition to the American war in Iraq, and that was part of the reason why Turkish parliamentarians decided that first vote maybe wasn't such a great idea, much to the chagrin of American officials. Wolf.
Very much to the chagrin of U.S. officials. Meanwhile, the watchword for the war from Washington is a very precise word, and that is caution. But more optimistic words are coming from the commander of one of the aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf, Rear Admiral John Kelly, the commander of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the carrier battle group in the Persian Gulf, believes the war will be won swiftly. CNN's Kira Phillips is embedded aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln.
Joint Chief of Staff General Richard Myers said yesterday that the U.S. was approaching large-scale operations. Well, welcome to shock and awe from the USS Abraham Lincoln. Let's take a look at these pictures from not long ago when the first strikes began. Strike fighter pilots here have been training for massive airstrikes, fast and furious. After Tomahawk missiles were launched, strike fighters engaged their targets, military sites, air defense systems, government buildings, Iraqi leadership compounds, and air bases. Two of those pilots that were on that massive airstrike over the evening, Lieutenant Steve Uries, also Lieutenant Lucas Kadar, thank you so much for being with me. I want to get your insights. You guys just got back not long ago. Well, talking about the issue of collateral damage, let's address that right off. A lot of people are concerned about the Iraqi people. They see these airstrikes, they see the explosions live on CNN. Lucas, let's start with you. Tell me what's done to prevent collateral damage besides those precision weapons.
Well, we take it into account in our planning. We plan to minimize collateral damage, minimize collateral damage that could be to the civilians of Iraq. Also, if it's a PID issue and we want to minimize blue on blue losses, that's always our biggest concern, is not to prevent the fratricide situation that's always a threat out there.
And how about you? What did you see? What were you feeling as soon as you got in country?
I was amazed at the sheer size of this operation, the number of people talking on the radio, but also for the hour prior to us getting in country and dropping our bombs, explosions, as far as I could see, going off probably 2 or 3 every second for a full hour. It was quite amazing. I've never seen anything like it.
Well, there you were in the threat envelope. Did you realize, at what point did you realize what Operation Iraqi Freedom is all about? What is it all about to you?
The regime, we know they have weapons. We'd be silly to think that those weapons couldn't fall into the hands of somebody that wouldn't think twice about using them in New York City or Washington or Los Angeles or some place back home. And I'll be damned if that's going to happen again. And sure as hell aren't going to let those weapons get back to the United States. If we can end this now, then now's the time to do it.
With the way things went tonight, Kira, if we keep on the track that we were operating smooth, I think we're gonna see progress that's on schedule, if not ahead of schedule. Over to the planners as far as how long it's going to take to happen. We're just here to execute and do what we did tonight. So.
Lieutenant Lucas Kadar, Lieutenant Steve Uries, gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll continue to stay here aboard USS Abraham Lincoln, continuing to cover the campaign as it goes down through the day and through the night out here in the Persian Gulf. Back to you.
CNN's Kira Phillips aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln. Those aviators clearly pumped, their adrenaline moving along. They're very excited, clearly proud of the job that they have just done. But Aaron, there's another part of this story as well.
There is. That too is the nature of war. There are successes and great successes, and there are also great tragedies. And there have been tragedies as well in this on the American side. Thelma Gutierrez at Camp Pendleton, this Marine base in California, Southern California, and the home of some of the Americans who have already died in this conflict. Thelma?
That's exactly right, Aaron. I can tell you that the mood here at Camp Pendleton has been somber, to say the least. This is home to some 40,000 Marines, some of whom were the first to cross over into Iraq. Now, yesterday we talked to some of the wives. They told us that they were on pins and needles just waiting for this ground war to begin, but today they're faced with this very somber news that 14 coalition forces or troops are now dead.
The flag at Camp Pendleton flies at half-staff. A reminder of the reality of war.
We are certainly grateful for their lives, their courage, and their sacrifice, and our hearts go out to their families.
The first coalition casualties in Iraq, 4 Americans and 8 British die when their CH-46 transport helicopter crashes and burns near the Iraqi border. Officials say caused by mechanical failure.
We're scared that something like this would happen.
The pilot, 30-year-old Captain Ryan Beaupre, was based at Camp Pendleton, California, and is mourned by family in his hometown of Bloomington, Illinois.
He did always want to fly. He thought that he could do more as a person, and said that he was going to join the Marine Corps.
Also killed in the helicopter crash, 36-year-old Major J. Oben of Waterville, Maine, 25-year-old Corporal Brian Kennedy of Houston, Texas, and 29-year-old Staff Sergeant Kendall Watersby of Baltimore, Maryland.
George Bush, take a good look at this, man, because you took my only son away from me.
His father angrily blamed George W. Bush.
You lose your only son and child, you don't really know what's really going on, but what they tell you.
When anyone loses a member of their family, it's not something that's taken lightly, and we mourn the loss of these Marines.
Before the end of the second day of the ground invasion, 2 more Marines were killed in action. Their names have not yet been released. At this family diner in Fort Stewart, Georgia, military families, many with relatives serving in the Gulf, watch nervously as the war unfolds, hoping that there will be no more casualties, but somehow knowing it will not be the end.
Just hope they get back safe, do a good job. I know they've all been trained to do it, and just do your job and get back home safe.
Get it over with and bring them home.
And that's exactly what all the families here at Camp Pendleton are hoping for. You look around this base at the cars and businesses and homes, and you see yellow ribbons tied around some of the cars and the mailboxes and the trees out here at Camp Pendleton. Aaron, back to you.
Thank you, Thelma. Your heart goes out to that father, and you understand his sorrow and his pain as well. Thank you, Thelma Gutierrez, Camp Pendleton. Some of the best photographers in our business, in the world of journalism, are in Iraq or trying to get into Iraq. Believe me, not all of them are carrying television cameras. Many, and we have great affection for still cameras and the photographers of the Associated Press and others. Before we go to Larry King Live, take a moment to show you some of their work, moments of war, quite literally frozen in time. Some of the still pictures of the shot by the men and women of the Associated Press. Powerful stuff, that. And that concludes Strike on Iraq, the front lines. This 2 hours, Larry King Live, coming up in just a second. I'll see you again on Newsnight, 10 o'clock Eastern Time. Day will have broken in Baghdad by then. Larry's coming up for Wolf Blitzer, who's had a long day in Kuwait. We'll see you again at 10. Heidi Collins has the headlines up next.
Good evening, everyone. We do continue our coverage on the strike on Iraq with Larry King in just a moment. But first, this is the news happening at this hour. American and British forces report little significant opposition in their campaign to take Iraq. These troops seized control of the Iraqi port of Qasr. And to the west, you're looking at members of the 3rd Infantry. They moved through the southern town of Safwan, apparently greeted warmly by the mostly Muslim residents. Also in the south, the first surrender of an entire Iraqi division and the seizure of the Fall Peninsula. A convoy that stretches miles wide is closing in on the halfway point to Baghdad. For now, we will go to Larry King live. He joins us now.
Thanks, Heidi. Larry King live with CNN's continuing coverage of Operation Iraqi Freedom. As day 3 dawns over Baghdad, it's a very different Baghdad from yesterday. After the start of the U.S. shock and awe bombing campaign that'll drop some 1,500 bombs across Iraq, it's now just past 5 a.m. Saturday morning in Baghdad. And we'll have the latest from CNN correspondents on the front lines from northern Iraq down to Kuwait. We'll hear from reporters embedded with U.S. troops, Colin Soloway of Newsweek, heading into southern Iraq with the 101st Airborne, and Newsweek's Kevin Perino, also in southern Iraq with the 3rd Infantry. Also joining us, Lieutenant General Robert B. Johnston. He was General Norman Schwarzkopf's Chief of Staff in Desert Storm. Plus, U.S. Army Colonel retired David Hackworth, Senators Kay Bailey Hutchison and Dick Durbin, and former Senators Alan Simpson and George McGovern. We'll start first with a quick question for Colonel Hackworth, who, by the way, is one of the most highly decorated veterans in American history, the award-winning military correspondent. He's got a new book out called Steel My Shoulders, Hearts. What's your read, Hack, on the occurrences to this minute?
Knocking him dead, Larry. Knocking him out of the ballpark. It's a win-win situation. Very seldom a military plan goes according to plan. They seldom survive the first shot. And this sucker's in its 3rd day and going along brilliantly on the ground and in the air.
We'll come back to Hack throughout the program. He'll be with us throughout the hour. Let's go now to northern Iraq and Brent Sadler. Brent, can you tell us where you are and what's happening?
Well, Larry, in northern Iraq at the edge of the Kurdish front lines, not far from the city of Kirkuk, the place that everyone talks about because of its oil wealth. No sign of burning oil wells here, although that's a possibility. Also, no sign of any great shock and awe in this region. So